Oh, and here we go. Welcome to the AcePro Explorer. Just going to go straight into this. I'm sort of doing two guitars at once, doing the Squier Telecaster Standard Series and the AcePro Explorer. And again, I'm going to assume you haven't watched either of them or any of the other videos. So what am I doing? I'm doing a Reloved Guitars setup. What does that mean? That means I'm going to take this guitar mostly apart, check it out. I'm going to clean it, clean the components. I'm going to make sure it works, and then, kind of most importantly, really, I'm going to treat the neck in a way that levels the frets, cleans them up at the same time, repolishes them so they're really, really nice and chip free and free of imperfections and flat spots, and then put it all back together again and set it up with a really nice action, new strings, and really importantly, in setting the action, get the both ends of the guitar right, so that the bridge end, I think that's in Wales, isn't it? Get the bridge end right, and but even more importantly, almost get the nut action correct, because this bit, the nut action, has almost has the biggest impact, in my experience, on the way a guitar plays, or the way it feels to play. And actually, in terms of certain intonation issues, it very definitely has a huge impact on the way it plays. So, and that's kind of the secret for me in getting it set up nicely. So I'll be paying attention to that, and I think I'm going to restring this with 10s. This one, it feels like it's happy with 10s. It came with 10s, so I'm just going to put these dangerous things out of the way. What are you after, Claire?
Trowel.
Trowel. It'll be down there somewhere. Ah, this has just reminded me of something. Fret leveling. Aha. Yeah, it's just something. I bought a diamond thing the other day for sharpening, well, quite a while back, for sharpening chisels. But I saw somebody somewhere else, I think it might even be StewMac, selling a thing just like this for leveling frets. And of course, why not? It's an abrasive surface. I might even try it one of these days, but I won't try it on a guitar that I'm selling. I'll do it on a duff neck. In fact, I've got a spare neck sitting right over here, so I might even make this my new sacrificial neck for playing with. Anyway, so what have we got here? We have got a very dusty old Explorer, and I'm going to take it right down to get everything off, including the tuners, and put them all in a box and give them everything a clean before it all goes back together. So, I don't know if you can see that, but it's a really filthy, dusty old Tune-o-matic bridge. Filthy and dusty, but essentially good condition. I'm just going to take off all of these tuners, and I'm going to clean them individually, because the thing about having gold fittings like this is that they're really nice looking, and you can make such a difference when you take a filthy, neglected old guitar and give all the chrome bits a clean and get in between all the bridge saddles and so on, and doing that and then doing a sort of general body clean up and a bit of a polish if you need to, then you can really transform a tired looking old underdog. Oops, sorry about that. And that's what I like to do. It's you know, the thing is about doing this is you don't really need to do this on all these guitars. Sometimes they're just clean looking as they are, but I like to do it because it sort of builds in thinking time and assessing time, so I can just look at everything. I don't rush anything when I'm doing this cleaning stuff. It's like it sort of paces the rhythm of the job for me. Yeah, that's what it does. So I get to just look at everything bit by bit. So when I'm taking these off, I'm looking at what's happening here, and I really like having that time. And it does mean that I can't shorten it in any way. There's no shortcuts I can take, and you'll see that when we come to leveling the frets and then reprofiling and polishing them, that takes about an hour and a half, and there's no quick way. The guitar making industry does have a high-tech way of leveling frets, and that's, I've not seen it, but apparently that's called a Plek machine, which is this fabulous computer controlled thing that you can I need a Phillips head a minute. Yeah, computer controlled thing which you can stand your guitar in and dial in whatever, and it will put the neck under playing tension and do all manner of clever things, and then proceed to level and redress the frets for you. And it's all very scientific and I guess very expensive too. So that's something that we don't have access to here. Certainly not it's not the kind of thing. Apparently I've seen it seems to be about 300 quid a go if you want to put your guitar through it. So obviously it's completely out of the reach of the budget guitar range. But apart from spending a lot of money on either buying a Plek machine if you're a repair shop, or if you're Gibson or someone like that manufacturing guitars, then the only other option you've got is to do this kind of work, and as I say, it takes about an hour and a half to do that neck work, and you know you have to work very hard to get it right, and it's all about you know, paying attention and precision of what you're doing. So, but it's very satisfying, and like I said, some of it is really kind of brain off. It's really rewarding to just take it slowly. Now there's the button on here which I'm sort of tempted to undo because it's got some cellophane trapped underneath, but I might just cut round it to get rid of the cellophane. Partly because it's so tightly fixed on that getting these things fixed tightly in position is quite a chore anyway at the best of times, and I don't want to go and undo it and reintroduce sort of looseness into it just for the hell of it, because it seems a bit counterproductive. So I will solve the sticky up bits of polythene problem by cutting carefully around it. So meantime, I'm just going to give this old bodywork a quick clean up with naphtha, and this isn't like a final clean or anything. This is just get rid of some of the major dust that's just everywhere, and really just a kind of like a pre-surgical wash with iodine sprinkled everywhere liberally. No, it's just I just want to have a look and see what we've got, and I can clean some of the dirt off the pickups too, which is nice. They look a lot cleaner all of a sudden. They don't have a vintage look. They've got a very modern white plastic look to them, but again, that's, it may or may not be your preference, but again it does match the pickguard, which is also a modern non-vintage white. I'm just going to go over the whole of the body here with my cloth. Just again, I say it's a really good way of, you know, physically going over the body of the guitar and just seeing where the flaws are and the bits of damage are that we need to look at or pay attention to, if any, and gets rid of loads of the goo. Now I can see that on this thing, the strap button at the front has been relocated because it's the previous one has worn out, so they've just literally moved it to one side, which is absolutely fine. It's what you do if that's what happens to you and you're a guitar owner. You say, I need a strap, I'm just going to dig a new hole, but of course it leaves you with a slight ugly hole which I can fill with some wood, and I can also put a bit of black lacquer over the top as well, just to fill it. There's no reason why not to. I'm just going to take some of the goo off the fingerboard. It's fairly clean, but you can always do with a bit of a disinfectant with this naphtha. That's not really disinfectant. What I mean is a kind of degrease, if you like, get the finger grease out of it for starters. And if we want to, we can then oil it right at the end, just before we put everything back together again. Because I think there goes the nut. I didn't really intend to take it off, but it's done it for me. Okay. Yeah. So cleaning the sort of finger goo off here, it does dry it out, or visually appears to dry it out, but as I say, that would either be replaced by somebody playing it within a short period of time, or if you like this sort of cosmetic look of an oiled fingerboard, then you can just add, we will add a little bit of oil just before reinstalling before putting the strings back on. It just gives it that slightly hydrated look, rehydrated look, and it's not the right word because it's oil, not water, but so I'm just looking at all the bodywork here as I polish away, dust away I should say really. It's all in pretty good shape, and I think that the only thing it's going to need in a couple of spots is just a bit of attention with scratch remover, just to get it as good as it can be. It's not perfect, but none of these guitars ever are, but it's in good enough condition that it'll look great if you're playing it on stage or sitting in your bedroom. But yeah, just a few little areas to concentrate on. And there's a couple of tiny scuffs on the end that I might just touch up with a tiny bit of black lacquer. But apart from that, it's all in good shape. Like many glued neck guitars, it's taken a whack somewhere, with the result that the lacquer seal at this point, the join has just cracked. But I know from experience that that is a lacquer issue. It's just where the force of taking a knock has just cracked it. It's the brittleness of the lacquer, relative brittleness of the lacquer, whereas wood flexes underneath it, the lacquer I think is less likely to. Okay, so this guitar, the only downside about it is its shape, and it's a glued neck, so set neck, so I can't take the neck off to work with it. And one of the things that kind of applies to a set neck, not so much on this one, but certainly on a Les Paul, is that I've got a diagram on the board which you maybe look over my shoulder and see, but when you get to the place where the neck thickens up and where it's glued into the body, both the thickening and the gluing to the body introduce a kind of rigidity to this part of the neck. So my experience has been that necks that are glued of various type tend to have a rigidity up here, which means that when you use the truss rod, it tends to affect this part of the guitar. Now on a Les Paul, it tends to be almost all of that. On this guitar, it's probably more like that would suffer from any rigidity. But it's and an SG as well, it tends to be out of the body like this, so it's a lot less subject to that same rigidity. But a Les Paul, where it's buried right into the body and glued into a great wodge of mahogany, can give you this really bizarre sort of flat plateau followed by a curve, which has quite an impact actually if you're thinking about making a smooth relief all the way across the neck, so that everything plays evenly and you've got the same kind of clearances all the way through. Okay, so all of these knobs all the buttons are nicely in place, nothing loose at all. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make an adjustment to the neck, and then I'm going to cover it with masking tape, getting ready for the fretwork. So my preferred way, and it's only my way, and some people get really annoyed about this, my preferred way is to sight down the neck. I like to do it just visually, and there's some reasons why, and I'm not going to bother to bore you with them, but anyway, that's what I do. And I estimate the amount of relief in this neck based on that, and also whether it's twisted in any way or not. So this neck has a tiny amount of twist in it, but it's nothing to worry about. Many do. And actually, as it stands right now, that is level enough for me to work on without doing any truss rod adjustment. So what it means is when we work on this, level the frets, and then we put the strings back on at a later point, it will pull, the string pressure will pull the neck into a certain amount of relief from its resting position here, and then all we need to adjust is that enough relief caused, bowing of the neck caused by the strings, or do we need to counteract that and bring it back to shallow it out? But if you start from flat, you can always pretty much guarantee that unless you've got some problem with your truss rod, you can guarantee that the pressure, the poundage of the strings will pull the neck into a gentle curve. If it doesn't, as I say, it could be that you've started from a concave shape, in which case the strings are only just about counteracting that. Or it could be that your truss rod is broken or stuck and won't allow the neck to flex under the pressure of the strings. Anyway, so here's another nice brain off part of the process. It's called masking off the neck. And to do that, you just get yourself some low tack masking tape and you just start covering off the neck, the fingerboard I should say. And this will protect the fingerboard while we then go on to the next process, which is the process of leveling the frets. After we've leveled them, we reprofile them so that they're a nice rounded shape again, no flat spots. And after we've reprofiled them, we then polish them out so that they're nice and shiny like they're new, which means you can bend strings and it's all really nice to play. And the reason I level frets as the core of a setup is because it's quite simple in some ways. On most electric guitars that you buy second hand, the previous owner will have already will have reduced the playing action as far as they can possibly go without getting buzzes, and then they get buzzes and they kind of raise the action a bit. And almost all used guitars will have had the action tweaked to the lowest it will go before it hits problems caused by the underlying unevenness of the frets. And it's the underlying unevenness of the frets, in my experience, that then make it impossible to play, because you get down here and you play a note or bend a note and it chokes off. It's that and the way the neck relief is set that can have a really big effect. So as a start point, when I get a used guitar like this, I will, as a matter of course, I will level the frets. Now it may not be, sorry, negative, it may be that once I've levelled the frets, done all the work on it, got the relief correct, the bend in the neck correct, got the action set right and the nut action and so on, it may be that you don't like playing with a very low action, and that's absolutely not a problem, because what will happen is I will set the action on the, I'll take that off because that's not right, I will set the action on these guitars slightly higher than the lowest action it can play, because I recognise, I've learned the hard way by the way, that people don't, not everybody likes the lowest possible action, and if I send a guitar out with the lowest feasible action on it, it can actually just be totally not to the taste of some people, and it spoils it for them and for me as a seller. So my kind of initial enthusiasm for making kind of sort of 1mm playing actions at the 22nd fret has given way to a sort of kind of careful, a bit more of a cautious setting. And there are some really good reasons why to do that as well, because some people prefer more space for the strings to spin and oscillate, because they prefer the resonance, you might say, or the sustain that gives. And by the way, if I use words incorrectly like resonance and sustain, please don't waste your time being unpleasant to me about it. I think you know probably what I mean if you're being a bit accommodating and not judgmental. When I say that somebody likes a higher action, it means that when the string is struck and it spins from in the middle of its length, a higher action gives that a bit more room to spin, and therefore it will allow the string to be probably hit a bit harder before it comes back and hits on the fretboard and so on. So some people like a higher action. The one thing, so as a result, what I do is I level the frets so that the guitar, if you wish to, you can set the action usually very, very low indeed. And for some people learning, that's a really, really important thing to be able to do. I mean, first of all, the action this guitar will go out with will be inherently good for a beginner. It will make fretting the chords around the bottom end of the neck very easy. That's always the case, because I do have a standard action that I set them up with in terms of the height of the string over the first fret. But when it comes to the far end playing action, the bridge setting, it's then I will set it a bit higher than the minimum, so that it's sort of a compromise between the lowest it will go and being able to leave people hit the strings a bit harder, or dig in, as I learned people call it. And the nice thing about that is that on most guitars, a Strat or a Les Paul style guitar, it's pretty easy to make an adjustment downwards if you wish to make the action a little bit lower. And the nice thing about having the frets leveled is that you then have freedom to go a lot lower than you ordinarily would if you hadn't done that work. The other thing, by the way, I've learned that's really important over time, or I've learned over time that's really important, is that I've now cut a little nick in my aluminium ruler, or aluminum if you're Dave over there in the US. And the other thing I've learned, and I'll draw this because I find it quite interesting, I've learned something that really makes a difference in the feel of a guitar, and this is why I'm set up to refret things so much now. I've become a refret monster. You might think I refret even when it doesn't need it, but so let's draw a neck. So here's a neck and here's some frets. And what I've noticed is when these are really worn down, which they often are, obviously on second-hand guitars. So let's say we've got some worn frets. What I noticed is that when the string goes over the top of there, it's so low. Obviously, the deck, it's very different from the action. It's not the same thing. We're talking about I can't really draw it, but we're just talking about that height there between the top of the fret. If we zoom in, there's our slightly worn out fret, and there's our string when it's fretted, okay? And it makes the fretting there, and it comes back off there at a bit of an angle. It's that height here. When it's below a certain amount, i.e. when your fret is worn out too much, there's a kind of minimum of this height below which it really feels crappy and you really need to refret. And I don't know exactly what that dimension is, but I know it as a feel. And what it is it's the reason why it feels so uncomfortable is if you think about something that's too low and your finger presses on there's your big finger pressing on the thing to fret the note, so the string bends down to there. What tends to happen is when this is really low, it's really crap drawing, but your finger touches a hell of a lot of the fingerboard because your finger kind of overhangs the string. When this is really high, let's make it really high frets, extremely high frets, and you press on it to fret it. There's your finger pressing on it, right? What really happens is you're pressing mostly on string and hardly any on the wood. You've got kind of a gap, but on the lower version, you're touching the wood's touching the inside of your finger, and that makes all the difference. It's the balance between those two, and also you want it to be a bit like this, so that you've got some sideways push. So the string, if you can see, goes down the kind of. It's hard to say, but you've got a lot of room to get underneath that and push sideways. When it's really flat like this, you're flat on the deck and you're having to push flat. It's like pressing a string down flat onto the deck and then trying to push it along the ground, whereas this one is like trying to get alongside it, pushing it onto the frets with a bit of a curve and then pushing sideways. Sorry if it doesn't make an awful lot of sense, but I guess the whole point of that little tale is I'm just beginning to learn the kind of the bottom level limits of when it just starts to be unplayable. And it looks like, in principle, or sort of visually, sometimes it looks like it's got enough material on the frets to carry on playing, but actually what happens is I can tell it's hit that limit. I don't want to play it anymore because it's below that, whatever that actual measurement is. So when I get to that measurement, whatever it actually is, then I'm into refret territory, and it's mainly because the quality of the playing experience is degraded from that point onwards. It just doesn't feel right. And I had a customer who came last week, and it's a really annoying, cautionary tale. I don't mind telling you. A customer was interested in a really nice red parts caster Strat that I had, and I was holding off to get some frets in to refret it because the frets were worn out completely, exactly with that problem in mind. And so I didn't have much time, but I scheduled it for last week, and he was coming over to pick it up on the Sunday. So I kicked off doing the job and took the old frets out. I'd bought a new fret rocker because this one had worn out, started to wear in the same, it actually wears out in the spots where it touches all the time. It's amazing, but it does after a year, and it gives her false readings. So I bought a new one, laser cut, and so I got this guy's I got Tim's guitar de-fretted, got the neck up on the jig and started refretting it. Refretted it, beautiful job, and then started the fret leveling process, which I always do after refretting because the frets are never perfectly level. You need to do the fret leveling and reprofiling and polishing, like we're going to do now. And so I went off with this new fret rocker, and I was whizzing away with my fret leveling file, checking, and it kept saying it's uneven, it's uneven. So I kept taking more material, thinking I've really screwed this, I must have screwed this fretting job up. And I kept on going. And now these weren't very tall frets to begin with, they were brand new, and I stopped. And by the time I realised what had happened, I was halfway through the life of those frets. And what had happened was that my brand new, not this one, but the brand new one I bought, laser cut one, was faulty. And what was doing it was when they were perfectly level frets, it was showing me that they weren't, it was telling me they weren't level, and I was continuing to try and level them. But if I had changed over to the other side, it was showing me absolutely level. So it was reading differently between two sides, meaning one of the sides, well, the long one was faulty. And that cost me half the life of those frets in one go because of that fault. So it's a cautionary tale. Don't trust this. You got to. This is wrong. It will cost you an entire refret. As it was, when I stopped in time and realised, in fact, my frets were level, I was just wearing them away because the rocker was faulty. I was then able to finish the job, profile them and polish them up and restring the guitar. But what I wasn't able to do was, of course, I wasn't able to charge my customer for that job. So I had to apologise that the frets weren't the brand new, rugged, sticky up frets that he was expecting. It was still good to play, it was still way better than it was when I got it, but it was halfway through its life already, and so I couldn't charge anything for that. So I lost 150 quid's worth of refret time and money because of an imperfection in a brand new tool that I bought, especially because this one had become inaccurate. Now you try telling the vendor of that tool why you're a bit annoyed, and the vendor at the moment is barely willing to accept the tool back, with a kind of air about him saying, this has never happened before. Well, I prove it I've got a video showing exactly how it is. But that's a slight aside. The moral of the story is, of course, is don't trust this. You've got to keep rechecking this. If your next bit where you take away actual material that you can't replace is dependent on this, you've got to be sure this is right. And sadly, I trusted the replacement. I just assumed it would be right. If I could understand this had worn out over time, it's a year of about 80 or 90 jobs I've done with this. It's not surprising it's worn out. But what I did wrong is I trusted the new one implicitly, and kind of paid for the mistake. But it's all in the wonderful journey of learning. I'm not bitter about it. I just I was mostly sad that I couldn't give couldn't give Tim the guitar in the state that I really wanted to give it to him, because it is a lovely guitar, and it should have had 25 years of playing life left in the frets, not 5. Anyway, that's a cautionary tale for you. So, having prepped these bits of tape, as you can see, whilst chatting away about stuff. I'm just going to go and apply this, these strips, and I know that I've cut enough that will take me all the way down to the end of this neck, and I can always cut a bit more if I need to, but this just sort of automates the process a bit, and as I say, it kind of leaves me knowing that one board's worth will do the job every time, so I don't have to kind of try and calculate it each time. So this is absolutely critical to make sure that you protect the fingerboard, because the fret leveling work is destructive in that true sense of the word, in that it takes away material that you can't put back on, but it does it in a kind of quite a rough way with a file or sandpaper or some other kind of abrasive device. And what we don't want to do is end up, whilst we're doing that, damaging the fretboard or the finish. So I'm going to do the fretboard, and I'm going to cover over the pickups up here as well, because my leveling tools are going to kind of ride past the end of the neck, and I need to make sure that they don't accidentally damage the finish. It's critically important on a guitar that I've bought to sell, like this one, but it's also massively important on an owner's guitar. They don't want to get it back with sandpaper marks down the, or filing marks over the top of their pickup screws or something like that. So I'm just going all the way down. As I'm doing this, it's nice and slow, so one of the things I can always do is check the condition of the frets in more detail as I go. And these are pretty good, they're very, very new. This guitar hasn't been played that much. It looks like it's been bought, played a bit, and then left in a bedroom for a very long time, which is perfect for me because I've got loads of fret material to start with. Going back to that description about the importance of having that minimum height of fret material and why it feels so different on a guitar. It becomes really important if I get a guitar in, and I have had several just recently, where even where the seller, when asked, you say what condition the fret's in, they go, oh, absolutely brilliant, mate, hardly any, no fret wear at all, nothing to worry about. And then you get the guitar, or you go and travel, as I've done, miles to meet the person and get the guitar, and it turns out that not only isn't it minor fret wear, it's quite the opposite. The frets are almost worn out. For that reason, you can play it, it plays, but it just feels like it's had its day because your fingers are on the wood. So you will get it, and when you get a guitar like that, my only option these days, since I've taught myself how to do it and I've got the equipment, is to refret it. And so when I do get a guitar like that, basically I just have to take it on the chin. I lose the money all the time, and I take it down. The way I look at it is that it's okay, I'm probably just about breaking even in order to learn or practice a bit more, which is, it's not a bad thing. But it doesn't make it right that people don't tell the truth about the condition. And I'm thinking about the Squier, Korean Squier Strat I recently had, or still have. I haven't listed it yet. I'm going to list it on Monday. But the Korean Squier Strat, which, despite me asking the seller the condition, whether A, specifically did it have any cracks in the neck pocket area, and B, what condition were the frets in, and the seller assured me that it was no to the first question and perfect to the second, which of course when I got there after a long journey turned out to be exactly not the case. So in that guitar's case I had to try and kind of repair the neck cracks, which actually were stable, but I didn't get very far with, or didn't make a very good job of the lacquer repairs because of excess humidity out here in the middle of British winter. And I also had to refret it at basically my cost, because I can't really pass that cost on to someone else, it's not their fault. I mean, the buyer gets, in the plus, the buyer gets a set of frets that will last for a quarter of a century, because I didn't wear them down myself to begin with. So that's it's an added benefit, but I can't charge somebody as if they brought me their classic pride and joy for a refret. So it's it's the risk you take from doing it, this eBay part of it. And actually my experience is doing this, it's so much easier, it's much less risky when somebody brings me their guitar, because they know what it's like to begin with, and they're very easily able to judge the improvement straight away after that. So there's never any kind of question of I'm not sure, or I don't like this. It's somebody says, like, I can't play this, or the frets are worn out, and they get back a guitar with brand new frets on it that are really nice and create that lovely sort of direct feel when you're playing it. That's immediately tangible to an owner. They know how much improved their guitar is, and so the work feels like good value to them. But it isn't always the case when you do that work on a guitar that somebody has never seen or played before, and because they don't see the improvement, they can sometimes be, it's quite easy, it's understandable for people to be very critical about the action as they find it, or the condition of the body as they find it, or some detail, because they're kind of much more in a commodity consumer mode, even though I try quite to go to some lengths not to hopefully not to sell to that market, because it's not people looking for a cheap guitar and with price as a focus is, as you can probably tell, it's not my target market for obvious reasons. Anyhow, sort of chin wagging aside, you can see I'm just going over, making sure everything in the path of the files and the sandpaper is reasonably securely obscured. I can kind of, the price of a roll of tape, a couple of quid. It's sort of just, I always say more tape instead of less. And I remember I love the way people comment on YouTube. A guy commented on YouTube and saw me doing a bit like this on a customer's Gibson, I think it was, or Bernie, I can't remember which, but it was a customer's Les Paul copy, and I really thoroughly kind of taped off all of this area, the whole of the top end of the guitar, and the guy commented and said, you don't need that much tape. It's like, you might not, but I did. You know, I needed it to feel secure and confident, like this. Oh, you don't need that. Well, I do. You might not. So it's really interesting when somebody comments that. You think, why are you telling me? You know, you wouldn't do it. Fine, great. You wouldn't do it that way. Brilliant. But I clearly did. So it seems to be a bit silly. Okay. So what I know, right, as I'm ready to go into this next critical phase now, is I can see my frets. There are lots of life in them. They're pretty good condition. I don't think anyone's done any work to them, so I am free to work on them without any worry about getting down to that stage there. I know that the neck is level. I've made sure of that. I didn't have to do an adjustment, but I knew it was level. I'm going to use this thing, even though I know it's slightly faulty, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to double check, and I'm going to try and move around away from the bits I know are slightly worn. It's not ideal. I've ordered another one from StewMac in the US, but it's obviously going to take its time to arrive, and I couldn't really afford to run foul of this and get another one that didn't work, so I was prepared to spend on the StewMac version. So all I'm going to do is just demonstrate when you find unevenness, what happens is the fret rocker will pivot around the high fret. So you always test 3 at a time, and if the middle one's uneven, or the other 2 are low in any way, what you'll get is the effect of the middle one being high relative to one or both of the others, and you'll get this clicking noise. Now for our purposes it doesn't really matter which is the actual high one, because the tools I'm going to use are going to take care of all of them simultaneously, but it's really, I like to do it just for kind of interest's sake. But I also do know that the spots on here now, in fact I can even mark them on here where the worn out bits are. They go from there to there, there to there, and because the sides are used in the same way each time, I can literally say that is going to be a risk of being slightly uneven. So what I want to do, if possible, is go off to the side of those marks. You see that? don't trust the reading inside there. I'm going to have to compromise with this because it's the only one I've currently got. But what this tells me is, very quickly, if I find a marker pencil for a minute, just excuse me. Where's my pencil gone? Don't know. I need one. Okay. It's not the one I sort of wanted, but it will. I'll do it for a moment. Okay. Sorry, pushing everything around. Yeah, this will do. So I'm doing a reading, trying to kind of keep this off to one side. As far as I'm concerned, I can mark that one as uneven, relatively uneven, and I just move to the next one. Again, trying hard to avoid what I know is the worn out spots. And I've got some unevenness there. And yeah, again, I have to sort of shift sides, but then again, each side has got its worn patch, which doesn't make this easy. Yeah, it doesn't make it easy at all. Every bit's worn. But I'm just going to, this is just for info, it's relative. So I'm going to double check everything. Hooray, that one doesn't click at all. Again, if you are planning to level your frets, you don't have to do this bit. I'm doing it because I can and because it's sort of an interest for me to find out. I think Claire's outside moving the old burner and I think it's not working out very well. I have to help. You alright, Claire? You alright? The point of all of this is, oh my god, that's quite high. The point of all of this is to kind of demonstrate what I already know, but just there's variations depending on brands and guitars. But what's surprising, and I've learned in 80 or so setups, is that 100% of guitars, new and second-hand that have come through here, budget and custom shop, 100% of guitars have uneven frets, some amount of uneven frets. What's surprising is the average is around about 60% of all, 60% of any guitar frets. So I know. 14 out of 21 or 22 or whatever, roughly 15 out of 22, that kind of number. 15 out of 22 frets on an average neck are uneven. So it's just basically a simpler way of saying it is most. In fact, and what I can tell you is I've never yet come across a guitar through here with no uneven frets, and if I do, the first thing I will assume is that it's been levelled by someone else. And that's just because of the way they're put in. And if you see any of my videos where I do refret using the press over there, it's because it's a very unscientific, old-fashioned thing of pressing some thin bits of wire. I'm not, in fact, I'm not even going to bother with this. It's all of these frets are uneven, basically. That's about 90% for what it's worth. That was just me being nosy. But to do this properly, now all I'm going to do is draw some permanent marker on top of each of these frets. Yeah, to go back to what I was saying is the process of putting frets in is very prehistoric. You've got a slot cut into the wood. You've got a little piece of metal with a sort of stalk on it called a tang, and a round sort of domed top, like that's top of the fret, and then you press the metal one into the wooden one with some glue or not some glue, depending on how you want to do it, and you press it with some force, and you know, try as you might, that might be a varying amount of force, and because of various things, the nature of the slot that's in the wood or the glue and where it's sitting or whatever, they will all sit slightly differently, and depending on how much force you might put a bit less into one than the other, they all sit differently. And so when they dry, they will never be even, and that's what you get when guitars come out of factories. And so if you want them to be even, which a lot of manufacturers don't really mind, but if I want them to be even, I have to do something to them, and I have a variety of things I can do it with, but the same principle is always there. I'm going to level these frets in relation to each other, and I'm going to do it in one fell swoop. So what I've got here, in fact I've got 4 things I can show you now. The one that works really quickly is this one. It's a Crimson Guitars fret leveling file. It's quite rapacious. It's, you know, really rough file. There's no messing about with this. This will just scrape the hell out of these frets and cut off loads of metal very quickly. But even it being that long and very flat, it'll pretty much guarantee that what it takes off, it will level everything. So I just go up and down, and providing I've taken something off all of these frets, it won't be long before they're all level relative to each other. Another way people like is to take a steel beam that's guaranteed dead flat and stick some sandpaper to it and put that on top, and which is great. Takes a hell of a long time in my experience. Benefit of that is that it leaves you with much smoother frets anyway, which makes the job of polishing them easier, because these take quite a bit of polishing out those scratches. The downside of this one for me is that it takes a hell of a long time to get level. Here's another version of that, even longer. I've done it on the side of a kind of machined spirit level. But yeah, you can see I can get all of these frets in one go. And again, it takes a hell of a long time. Then there's this one, which I haven't tried because it's only come to my attention, which is a chisel sharpening stone. But again, this is incredibly flat. I have no way of testing how flat it is, but my God, it looks pretty damn flat. And this will make a pretty nice fret leveling thing. The only downside about this is it's hard to describe this. What you really don't want to do is level with a flat surface like that, because you'll make the frets flat. You'll take the radius out of the neck. So this isn't an advisable method, I've just decided, having thought about it. What is another method you could do, depending on the radius you're using, is a radius block like this. That has a built-in radius, and if I stick some tape to it now, and it's the right radius, I can kind of wear these, level these frets at the same time as making sure they keep that basic radius, which is a really good thing to do. This does it similarly, and so does this, because they're narrow. We sort of follow the radius like that by going up and down, and we go over the curve like that. This sort of does it all in one go, and this follows the curve. So if you're going to use a block, a sanding tool like this, or a file, it does need to be quite narrow. If it isn't narrow, it needs to have the radius built into it, which is why, despite StewMac selling this, that's really, I don't get why StewMac would sell a flat surface like this. You'd have to have, this would pretty much level this flat and take away the radius in the neck, which is pointless. So I'm going to go back to StewMac's catalogue and cast a critical eye over how they think that gets done, because I don't think that's a good idea. Okay, how have I always done it? I've always done it with this. I know it's very effective. I know exactly what to watch out for. What I might do is add a bit of this into it to start the process of leveling these scratches down before I get to the reprofiling. This one is a bit too long for my liking. I'll save it for another day. I just had it as a test. But this is a nice piece of box section steel, and it's really, really flat. So lots of talk, but hopefully it might be useful if you've ever thought of doing this. If you're looking for entertainment, honestly don't watch my videos, you'll be bored. So what's the process of fret leveling? Well, you mark the frets up with a permanent marker, then you use a device to level them all together. There are occasions when you can do one fret on its own. If you had everything was level on this except for one fret, I would deal with that one fret on its own. And in fact, a guitar I did last week, I did just that. It was a Chapman ML2, and it only had about 4 very, very slightly uneven frets, and the condition of the frets was so nice I didn't want to grind them all down and start again on all of them, so I just dealt with the high ones, and that was fine. But you have to pay attention in a very different way when you do that. And people who say, well, you've got to use a beam like this and the longer the better, well, it's true, you know, the longer it is, the flatter you're going to guarantee it is. But if you're careful and you know why you're only attacking 1 fret at a time, because there's a kind of economic or other reason behind it, then you can do it perfectly well. You just have to think differently. That aside, I'm going to do a combination of my favourite old-fashioned method followed by this to just smooth it off. I'm then going to reprofile the frets with this StewMac tool, which is great, and then I'm going to use a series of different kinds of sandpaper to achieve a kind of polished finish, a smoother and smoother finish. Right, so here we go. No time like the present. I don't need anything else other than my marker pen here to tell me whether this has contacted it or not. So I'm just going to go down the edge with nice smooth swoops, and I can see that I have to tilt the file quite a bit to get it to take anything off the edge, because it wants to sit on the flat spots. And off I go, and then I just work my way to the middle, and bearing in mind that it's quite difficult to get a purchase, as in bite, at the beginning and the end of the travel of this file, because it sort of tends to cut best in the middle once you've got moving. But I'm going to deal with that sort of issue by turning around and coming back the other way. But it's interesting, I just want to point something out. I'm going to unplug you a minute. Give you a close-up as possible on this. I don't know how well you can see this. So when you start working with a perfectly flat file, what it will show you straight away is where it leaves black behind, it shows you the low frets. That means this fret is below the level of the other frets, because this file is not even touching it as it goes over the top. So that's your first limitation. That low fret, when you're playing a note, the string goes so far down there that it makes that fret appear high by comparison. That's one problem. Leveling this all out equally will sync to the lowest common denominator, and that's an issue that you have to be aware of, because if this was so low that all the rest of these frets had to go down beyond a reasonable amount to match that lowness, you may be better off refretting this one. It may be worth sacrificing it and putting a higher fret in and just taking that one down and then doing it. So I'm keeping an eye on that. It's significantly low, but by comparison I can see this one here is significantly high, because it's flattened an enormous amount off that one already. But that tells me how high this sits relative to the other ones. So I can tell you that the frets on this neck are, there are a lot of uneven frets by number, which is quite common, but they are quite significantly uneven in terms of degree of severity. So to even this out, I'm going to turn the machine around and come backwards and concentrate on a thorough going over to make sure that I'm getting all the frets on this neck by going over it on the way back, making sure that the file is taking material off. It's quite destructive because of the severity of the frets and their unevenness. So now I'm just looking at what I've got, and I've got a lot of cutting going on here. The issue now is that even if I stop now, they're going to be more level than they were before, which is going to give you much more freedom on the action that you can set this guitar to play. But providing I've got enough to keep going, and these are quite new frets, which they are, I'm going to go until I've got this whole thing level, because it's a point principle. And what I can see is that this end here, the very top end, is actually quite a way off. So I'm going to actually focus a bit extra on here. Some people actually do this anyway at this end of the neck. They call it, I think they call it the fall away. And again, it's one of those things I've heard of, but I've not yet seen or heard a clear and compelling argument for this fall away, other than it gives them a bit of extra clearance at this end, and it may be to accommodate that structural stiffness that I talked about earlier on. Okay, so before I do anything else, I'm going to brush off all this metal swarf because there's quite a lot of it. Now, as far as I can see, I've taken loads of metal off some of these frets, and I've obviously cured some of the major unevenness here. I'm going to use my currently not hugely dependable fret rocker just to try and suss out whether I've got rid of the major unevenness. Now, what I'm expecting to find now is a little bit of unevenness still in this, and I'm finding kind of more than I'd like still, so there's a bit more work to do on this. Amazing thing is that this guitar obviously played before doing this. This is not, yeah, it is a bit of unevenness. The guitar played before, so you can see that it must have been set quite high. The action must have been set quite high to accommodate these extremes of unevenness. But it's still not at all good, so I'm going to run it again, concentrating as well on that end because I know that end is still uneven. There's still some unevenness in there. Okay, brush this off. It's quite, I mean, it is quite astounding how much remedial work this is taking. When you think that this should have been taken care of in a factory, or you'd kind of assume that the factory would be where this should be taken care of. Now, I'm conscious that my fret rocker is also slightly worn out, but it's still showing a high spot there which I need to take away. And I have to say, I will feel a lot more comfortable when I've got a decent fret rocker back in the mix of things. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop using that one. I'm going to now revert to this one. This is the sort of the sanding beam, if you like, and I'm just going to go back and forth on here, knowing that what I'm really going to be doing is taking off some of the worst of the scratches, but at the same time I will be making a sort of final levelling adjustment as well. It'll be a far less extreme than it's currently been, and you'll also get a bit of clattering at either end where this where the end of your beam hits a fret, but by and large this is quite a good device for the finishing part of it. Now what I can do is, there's no harm at this stage if I want to get some more marker pen on here just to diagnose where we've got to and what's being currently sanded and what's being missed, because that again tells us about the high and low spots. So there's my diagnostic marker back onto here. But you can see that this is quite an extreme job, and I haven't had one that's required quite this much levelling recently. So and at this point I do start to get worried, of course, partly because my rocker is not reliable and I don't want to end up grinding this all the way because I'm trusting the fret rocker when I shouldn't be.
Because you're off your rocker.
Because I'm off my rocker, I think so. But this will tell me if there's unevenness, right? So if I do a little bit of sanding here, it will tell me what this beam is contacting right now. And you can see it's contacting those two. They're still significantly high, and it's missing out a bunch of these altogether. It's contacting those up there, which are also high. So it's a real issue. Well, it's a real problem with these frets. That's really naff. It's missing all of that in the middle and just contacting, so it's sitting above those things. You know, the gap, but effectively a gap. And it's not huge; it's a minor gap, but it's there enough to mean that we're literally not making contact with a lot of those frets in the line.
Laser beams that's shining through that show.
It'd be great. Well, I say it would be great if these people did it in the factory, but then what would I do with my time?
Exactly.
So look, that one is high because it's contacting those. That's high. That's contacting those. Those are quite high, so it's taking off. And then there's a set in the middle, either side, which are not even being touched, which are clearly low.
Is that something to do with the way that people play up there and
no,
down there?
it's just the way these frets have been fitted. Or if the neck were not straight, which it currently is, because I've made sure of that, but it's quite incredible how much unevenness is still in these frets. So it's the way they've been fixed in the first place, in the process of fretting this guitar. And what will happen is I will keep going trying to level this until such times as I run out of, if there's not enough metal to go down to reach the point where they're all levelled, then I have to refret it, which is pretty crap. I don't want to obviously end up there, but this is quite an interesting situation. I mean, the differences can be microscopic. You know, you can miss this by a tiny fragment of distance, and you can see it's beginning to catch them now. So we'll get there. It'll take maybe another set of painting over with the marker and do it one more time. But it's taken a lot of material to get to level, and that's just a measure of how uneven it was.
Presumably that makes it takes it all down a bit more, which means that you've got less fret. And
so this, I mean, the answer to all of this would be, surely if you could get the frets in at a kind of microscopically level sort of method in the first place, so that you don't have to do this destructive taking life out of the frets to even them up. Maybe, you know, that's what manufacturers don't want to do, so they just say, okay, leave the player set the action at a compromise. But, you know, the fact that this is a recognised problem is proven by the fact that they've got these Plek machines that you can spend £300 to have this done to a sort of scientific level of precision. But it's still post the event, it's still after the frets have been put in. You're fixing a process that's inaccurate. We'll get there. What I'm not doing is pressing too hard, because I don't want to deform the neck in any way, because that then will sort of negate the fact that I'm doing this to a level. So I'm just letting the weight of the natural sort of weight of the bar pick this up. You know, and there's enough metal on all these frets to do this, but it does just show you the extent of the unevenness that's on this, that's inherent in the way this guitar is fretted, which is quite astonishing, really. But doing this bit really slowly is the kind of bonus. Then is that it takes out some of the really big scratches that we otherwise I'd normally have to deal with in my process that I would normally do. And the point about this is once we've got this taking metal off all of the frets, and what it means is we should be able to put a fret level on, or a rocker on this, and we should find absolutely no unevenness anywhere. That's the whole point, is that this is creating a single level kind of almost there. There's just 3 or 4 frets in this middle section that are not yet playing, not yet in our thing, but it'll be marginal now, and I would probably only expect the tiniest of rockings to happen here, if at all. Yeah, I can still feel it there. It's very, very small, but it's there. So you can either go aggressive with the crimson file, or just keep going with this process and just let it arrive at that level slowly. But we know where it is. It's this point here that's not level yet. I'm just keeping an eye on where the tail end of this goes, because I don't want it bashing anything too hard. So it's interesting that while my attention is clearly focused on this darker area here that hasn't been connected with the hasn't been bitten by the sandpaper, the problem is either side of it, and it's some really high frets either side that. And it's probably, in fact, I'm pretty sure it's these here that are still having to wear down to let us pick up these. And there's one here so it's practically forming a bridge between here and here, and not allowing us to get to here. But that's the nature of the distortion, or the unevenness. And if we don't take that out, we're never going to have a level playing field, to use that expression. And at the moment, what it's meaning is that the significantly high ones, which are now showing up as frets that seem to be now really flattened, these significantly high ones, including that one there, they're going to take quite a bit of reshaping, but we'll get there because the surface of them will be correct, relevant to these other lower ones. But it's a very good illustration of how extreme we have to go to correct this problem. And as I say, you've got to keep in mind, why am I doing this? Well, I'm doing this because I want accuracy of the heights of my frets. And why do I want that? Because I want to be able to choose the action I play, and I also want to be able to play without any choked notes wherever I play. So I want to be able to choose to play anywhere on the fretboard and have the notes and play cleanly and accurately, and I'm only going to get that if I level these frets out. I'm also just gently supporting this neck because I don't want this middle part to bend down and make it even harder for the cutting surface to contact these frets. Now we're getting there. Oh, sorry, we're getting there. It's longer, and the unevenness down here is it's not huge, but the problem is it's probably between the unevenness is between these down here and those up there, as opposed to the ones adjacent to each other. So it's quite a significant amount of work this is taking. And I think with this one I may have to reach a point where I'm going to have to accept that I'm going to have to stop and move to the next stage without completely curing the unevenness, because we'll just be sort of hit with a practical limitation that I don't want to have to take all of this metal off to achieve what I'm trying to do. Yeah, I mean, that is some significant unevenness between these two spots here. The fact that so much has come off this one, it just means that in reality that one up there is just significantly higher. The only indication you'll have of that is when you use your fret rocker and you get up to that point and you're thinking, wow, that is one loud, significant clicking going on here. And if you get to that, then basically you'll know that you're going to have a struggle to get these all level, which is what we've ended up with. Got to stick with it if you're going to get there. I'm going to take this outside and brush it for a second. How's that sun? Right. What do I think? What do I think? Minor. Very minor. Very minor. Get it off. See, even that's an uneven reading. There's a flaw in this damn thing. Okay, I'm going to call that as good as I'm going to get without taking this guitar to the ground level with this metal. So I'm going to now mark a pen over the top again, and we're going to move into the next stage, which is the reprofiling. And again, I think this is because of the degree of severity of the unevenness and therefore the flatness of some of these currently compared to some of the others where they've only just started to bite on the sandpaper. This reshaping process is going to be slightly different on each fret, and it's going to be harder and take longer on some than others. So I think I'm going to use the jumbo side on this. Let me just check. Let's see how it works for a minute. Is this jumbo? Is this jumbo? Is this jumbo? Do I need jumbo? Do I need jumbo? I think I do. I think it's the jumbo setting. So I'm starting on this one, but it doesn't really matter for now. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to use this file to wear down the shoulder, if you like, of this fret, so that what I end up with is a reshaped fret and a thin black line of marker pen across the top. And it's really critical to retain that thin black line, because it's that thin black line that tells us we haven't gone any further down in fret height, and that's what all of this is about. So if we were to keep on grinding away and take away that little thin black line, we'd have sort of defeated the whole point of this exercise, which, given the amount of hard work it's taken, would be really disappointing. So that's all I'm going to do, is I'm going to work on each one of these frets individually using the jumbo edge of my Stumac fret crowning tool, my diamond coated fret crowning tool, and I'm going to let the diamond particles do the work. I don't need to press too hard. The kind of surface will do the work it needs to do. And this is putting effectively a 300 grit scratch onto the fret, which is a lot finer than the scratch that was originally left by this, and then will be quite a lot easier to sand out shortly when we've finished the whole of the reprofiling thing. I am going to stop in a moment, take a break, and then I'll come back when this part of the job's finished, because it's just going to be you watching me very slowly take care of all these frets. Yeah, I'm looking at this side on. It'd be a nice set to play on afterwards, but it's touch and go. And actually, the thing about this is it's not really down to the brand. The brand's no better or worse than others, although this is probably the most significantly uneven. Numerically, it's not more uneven, but in terms of severity, it's probably one of the most uneven ones I've seen. Mind you, I haven't started working on the top of the Squire Strat Standard yet, so that might surprise me. But yeah, this is, in terms of severity, this has required the most care. But when it's done, you won't notice it, it'll just play beautifully. So I'm going to stop for now. Actually, if you look out the door, look at the sunshine. Fabulous. So I'm going to go and drink my tea out there and come back to you in a moment. Here you're back. It's a different time of day, as you can tell, but by the magic of time-lapse photography, I've got all the frets have been reprofiled, and so the next part of this process is to polish them out. So to do that, I'm going to use two different grades of paper plus some things called micromesh, or some stuff called micromesh, which is this very fine set of sandpapers or abrasive papers, which actually are out of order at the moment, out of sequence. So they go from 15 to 1800 to 2.4 to 3.2, 3.6 somewhere, 3.6, 3.2, 3.2, 3.6, 4,000, 6,000, 8,000 and 12,000. That's the final sequence for the polishing. Meantime, we've got 240 grit and some 600. And the purpose of this section now is to take out any and all of the marks. Now, the dangerous marks, if you like, are these, left by this very rough fret leveling file. I think, by the way, we've done this with the mixture of this 200 and something grit sandpaper as well as the 300 grit file, whatever it's called, the fret dressing crowning file. That's the word, fret crowning file. This one. We don't have anything really as rough as 240, but I'm just going to use the 240 anyway. So it's stepping backwards a bit just in case, and the reason is I want to make sure I get any of these out. So all I'm going to do is do it by hand. I'm going to support the thing, and I'm just going to roll the sandpaper over the frets and let my fingers kind of go up and down, because what we want is to regain a rounded profile. We don't want to put any more flat spots on it. We've spent quite a bit of time just now taking the flat spots out, so the last thing I want to do is put those back in. So I'm kind of pressing down vertically, and let my fingers kind of bounce up and down over each of these frets. And the important thing in this is to make sure they all get basically the same amount of treatment, because at 240 grit, this paper is easily rough enough to take the frets down further. Obviously we don't want to do that, we want to keep this level. So we just need to make sure that we get the same amount of coverage for all of the frets. It's been an absolutely beautiful day here today, starting with the solar eclipse, which was very strange and wonderful. I should have videoed it on the GoPro, to be honest. Sauce. And I'm going to just take this outside a second and brush it. And yeah, the idea is to get rid of any of those really meaty scratch marks that the fret leveling file would have left. And actually, I think the way we've done it, using the sanding bar, the square frame, the box frame with the sandpaper on top of it, I think we've pretty much done that. So I don't think we really need to hang about too much more with the 240. Actually, that's a bit rougher than we need now. So I'm going to move straight on to 600, and with this I'm just going to wrap it round this pointed foam block, and I'm just going to let the blocks go up and down this time. So the blocks now can get right into, right close into these frets, because it's quite pointed. Also, I've just gone and given myself a blister on that thing, which I didn't need to do. You can see why I've got tape over the end of this now, because it's so easy to just run straight off the end when you're doing this. So I'm just winding the paper around the end of here. Refresh it as we go. So you can see from the whole experience of doing this, first of all you can see how long it takes. It's certainly taken quite a while. I mean, obviously it hasn't taken all day. I've been doing other things like hanging out in a hammock for a while, like you've got to do when summer comes around. I mean spring. It's only March, for goodness sakes. But yeah, it takes a good hour and a half or more to get this done. You see all the dust. But you can see also that what I'm concerned about with the you see the problems we've had with the level of these frets and how huge an impact that has on trying to level them, and the amount of material that you actually have to take away before you get the frets leveled. By the way, the same thing would apply, exactly the same situation would apply if this was put in a Plek machine and done it in that sort of computerised way. You still have to go and take the material off to get a level set fret. So it really is about the unevenness that you actually begin with. That's the major limitation. So what I'm looking for is I'm just trying to find out, make sure that we've not left any of those big scratches from the fret leveling file, because those are basically the scratches that will get in the way of playing a guitar and bending strings. So that's what I'm focused mainly on at this point in time. And if we have got rid of those, then we can do a couple of sort of layers of 600 grit and then pretty much confidently move on to the finer papers, i.e. the micro mesh. So I'm just looking at this with a naked eye at the moment, but I could be giving it a really close look with my reading glasses. As I say, this is an unusual one for me because of the amount of trouble we had levelling these things up. So, just to be on the safe side, I don't want to go forward until I've got these, I'm convinced these scratches are gone. And actually I'm pretty good. I think we've started out with most of them gone because of the nature of the way we use the sanding beam. I'll do a couple more rounds with the 600. There's no harm in that. Interestingly, the real mistakes, I suppose, or the errors in the fretting process were mostly on the bass side of these frets. So they seem to have been fixed quite evenly and quite well on the treble side, but it's up here on the top edge that there's a lot of variation, and as a result we've had to take them down quite low to get them matching. Get them even, actually. Okay, so I'm probably doing two guitars at the same time in a way, jumping between them, so I'm going to jump back to another guitar. And that's the Squire Telecaster Standard Series. Right, I'm going to switch now to the this stuff, whatever it's called, micro mesh, and I'm going to turn the guitar around for this. Don't mind the fact it's really, really dusty at the moment, and I'll need to clean it properly again. Just move everything around, fit it in. Okay, so in this sequence I'm going to go from the 1500 up to the 12,000, and I'm going to spend a bit of extra time on the 1500, mainly because it's a big step between the 600 and 15, so I need to let it sort of graduate out those scratches really before we move on. So this takes a little while, but once we get past this 1500 one, we'll speed up really. Okay, now I'll move straight on. And again, won't need so much time on this one, just a few passes. Could be late sunshine coming in. Down the road, or on the way into our local town, there's one of those, I don't even remember what it's called, but it's a great big tree that as soon as spring breaks, it lets loose this massive bloom of deep pink flowers. It's just the most incredible colour, and I saw some of the blooms some of the buds on it about to burst out today. I'm thinking, wait a minute, this is not even at the 20th of March and it's starting to go. I think it might be the earliest I've ever seen it. Okay, it's quite aerobic this. 3,200. Very much now heading towards polishing stage. It doesn't feel like abrasive sandpaper anymore. looking at my chart, I'm doing this in slightly in reverse, because I had this guitar down for tomorrow, and the Telecaster now for today, and I'm doing a bit of both at the same time, but I'm getting further on this one so far. Doesn't really matter, just have to get both of them done. Nice. On to 6,000. Then 8, and then 12, and it's time to unpick everything and give it a wash down. So the question I've often thought about, but never had a chance to ask anybody who works in the manufacturing side of things, but I've always wanted to know why the decision has been made to leave guitars with this many uneven frets and then allow them to go to the shop or the retailer or the online retailer. And I guess the only thing I could think of, or I've ever been able to really think of as a plausible answer, is that it must be, there must be an economic sense in it. You know, knowing that to put it right really can only be done afterwards. So you're either investing in time and money for putting every single guitar through a Plex system, which even if it didn't cost that much, it would certainly cost a lot in time. When you think how fast these things must come off the production line. It's either that, or you have somebody doing this job by hand. Even if you sort of manage to speed up the process very rapidly, it's still going to take some time. So I can only assume that it's, you know, slows things down so that it doesn't make economic sense. And I guess the other thing must be, if the market isn't demanding it, then you don't do it. And I don't suppose, looking back, I don't suppose I ever knew that first of all my frets weren't level. All I knew was that most guitars, in fact pretty much every guitar I'd ever owned or played, had a crap action. As far as I was concerned, it was always too high. And I wasn't a lead guitarist, or it wasn't because I couldn't play lead guitar on it. It was just that, in my experience, it was hard to play, tiring. And eventually, I think, you know, when I got my Squier JV Stratocaster in 1983, that was my first proper electric guitar, and I think it was so big a surprise difference between that and the Satellite I learned on, that I kind of just stuck with it, and I didn't really ask why it was better or whether I could make it better still. So I guess most people just don't know that there is, they don't know their frets are uneven. They just, you know, one guitar is crap, one guitar is good, and you just try and avoid the crap ones or sell the crap ones and keep going, keep buying different guitars until you find one that feels good. So from that perspective, nobody's really looking for a guitar with level frets, then why would a manufacturer spend all that time and money making them? So I guess it's, while it's, to begin with, it slightly surprised me. It doesn't really surprise me, because it's not demanded by the market, and the lack of level frets has never stopped kind of fame-hungry teenagers going out and spending loads of their mums and dads' money on guitars. So it's one of those things, is if people buy the guitars anyway, why the hell would you spend more money making them unnecessarily accurate? I guess that's the bottom line. It's kind of a shame if you're a perfectionist, but actually a kind of rational business head would say, you know, you compromise, you have a sort of workable economic compromise. You do the best you can at a price that's the market's willing to pay, and you know, a profit margin you need to make in order to carry on operating in that industry. And frankly, if I suspect the margins in the manufacturing of these guitars the margins are so tight that I very much doubt they would tolerate somebody suddenly spending more money taking care of frets that basically no teenager has ever taken the guitar back to the shop and said, do you know what, these frets are 83% of these frets are uneven, I'd like my money back. It just doesn't happen. So because it doesn't happen, why would they do anything about it? So, but I think that's why I've always figured out that the market for this kind of extra quality work is going to be with the older folks like you and me, who get to an age and a point in your life where actually you do want it a bit better than the way it comes out of the factory. Yeah? Okay. See you in a bit. So yeah, I completely get it business model wise, so no grudge against the manufacturers. It's what the market wants. You know, and the truth is everybody wants their guitars at a sort of rock bottom. Well, not everybody. A lot of people, the bulk of the market wants their guitars at a rock bottom price, and for a lot of people, price is the predominant concern. You know, and where that's the case, then you have I guess some people call it a race to the bottom where price is concerned. But there's no space for people to add extra quality time into things. They've just got to produce to a very, very tight set of margins. I guess that's what they do. So anyway, there is a niche market who is willing to pay a bit extra over the odds, and that's you and me. Righty-ho. So lots of dust flying around, so it never looked quite clean. But here we are, our Explorer with freshly levelled frets, all freshly resurfaced as well, so they're beautifully smooth. Gonna see how that feels with some new strings on. Before I do that, I'm just gonna do a little scrub up against the sides of the frets, because sometimes the pen I use gets in there and it's not a problem, it's just a little bit, kind of spoils it a little bit. So this is a little bit of a bristly clean going on. So before I re-string this, I will put a little bit of oil on it. Great. Oh, I keep doing that. I keep forgetting I've got this stuff in the lid. It's sprinkling it everywhere. Yeah. So as I say, in a dusty environment, it's quite tricky to make it look spotlessly clean, but that changes when we take it indoors and get it ready for dispatch. Got a final brush over. Okay, that's nice. So let me get my excuse me, let me find some my oil, which is over here. And what I'll do for now is I'm just going to give this a bit of oil and put it off to one side, because I want to get on with the square telly. But let this just sort of sink in a bit. immediately sort of makes it look a lot better, although it's not really making that much difference in real terms. In fact, if anything, the truth is it's probably just making a surface that will pick up dust easier than the dry looking one, but it does look better, that's for sure. People prefer it to look like that. Okay. Forgot to buy something when I was in town, which was a whole set of polishing cloths and so on. Right, so I'm happy with that for the time being. I'm going to pop it to one side, hang it up. That's the hardest bit in a way done. Hey folks, back with the Explorer. Just going to put these bits and bobs out of the way that I don't need just now. Some of them anyway. And with the Explorer, I want to put my zoomed in glasses and just cut away this plastic around the selector switch, because it's not needed and it's a mess. You just have to be a little bit careful. Somebody's not really tried to get it, pull it away. Kind of annoying. It's one of the things that it's always in the plastic always goes under the various dials and knobs and whatever, and so you never get to get it off fully without either taking the switches apart, which really don't want to be doing that because it's only going to be a problem getting them to tighten up again, or you have to kind of go around it like this with a very fine blade, in which case you're always going to be cutting a little line into the plastic as well. Not that you'll ever see it, but it's just kind of talk about fiddly for the sake of it. Right, there we go. That annoying thing taken care of. So this is soaked up. It's what's the word? Oil? No, that stuff. Yes, oil. And actually, what I'm going to do, I'm going to put this down here for a second, because I just want to clean these various components before I do anything else, because they are a bit filthy. So I'll put them, as I clean them, I'll put them back in the container. But just a simple dust down and polish off as much as I can get with naphtha. The finish doesn't last forever on these kind of chromed things, but it can be a bit nicer than it was. Yeah, probably. Particularly this is absolutely filthy, so I'm going to use a toothbrush on this fella after I've chucked the stuff all over the place. And again, sorry, Mr. Clumsy strikes again. The Tune-o-matic bridge, one of my least favourite designed objects in the history of designed objects. But hey, it's a very much a late 1940s technology, or somewhere around thereabouts, which still survives today in our electric guitars of the 21st century. What don't I like about it? Well, I don't like the fact that these screws for adjusting the intonation, whichever way you cut or slice it, they end up facing or obstructing a string, which means you can't really get to them very easily without either gouging the slot on the thing or scraping strings, and it's it's just really inconvenient, and it annoys me every time I have to do it. Also, I found that with some guitars I constantly have to turn those little saddles around, because they have they don't seem to reach the right, there isn't enough adjustment length to reach proper intonation. I don't know why that is, but certainly on a series of, a whole fleet of the vintage Les Paul copies that I've done over the last year, I forget about the problem, and then I come to the next vintage Les Paul copy and I find myself going, oh, can't intonate this, damn, I'm going to have to turn these little saddles around, and I get really annoyed, and it's then I remember, hang on, this is a very familiar feeling, and it's then I remember that I've had to do this before. Oh, now it's 4 times, and I'm just wondering, you know, at first I kind of wondered if it was me just not able to get the intonation right, and then having done it, found 4 times in a row that the same guitar doesn't do it, has to lead me to think there's something about the design of the V100 which is kind of got a flaw somewhere. But you know, people still love them, and still they command high prices. So, but I suppose it's only when you do something regularly on these kinds of guitars that you start to see trends with it, and the average player who maybe has 1 or 2 of these over their lifetime or whatever wouldn't necessarily see those 4 things in a row. It would never occur to them. But sure enough, anyway, this is just a bit of cleaning up to bring a bit of sparkle back to the components, which are fairly good condition anyway, so it's not too bad. Everything is looking quite clean. Sort of speed dials, 3 of them, all the same. And we've got a nut here with a bit of glue stuck to the bottom, which will probably have to be sandpapered, but that's okay. Right, tip that back in there. Put it up on here. So, I'll put this all off to one side. So now I'm going to get ready to reinstall the hardware. Once we've done that, it'll be a case of then putting the strings on and start the process of putting them under, put the guitar under load. Right. So, just going to check before I put any of these things on. Not made for cleaning, this particular design actually. Can't quite get into some of the angular bits on the Explorer, but it's quite an interesting shape, but you know, say difficult, a little bit difficult to get to some of the parts to clean it. Okay, so let's turn all these into the same direction, and we're going to go 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Here we have it. What I don't know is the guy took this off, and I'm not sure why he took it off. Does it protect it? It's pretty strongly attached, no hassle there. Okay, we've got the tuners to reassemble. The simplest way is just to drop finger tight, attach them finger tight first, and then we'll go around and put the screws in, flip it over and put the screws in. Looks nice now it's been shined up a bit. So once we've done the fret leveling and the fret polishing, and we're starting to put either the neck back together, or in this case we're putting the hardware back on because the neck's already on. Next stage of all of this then is to restring it, put the neck under load, and then we're into setting the action and the neck relief, and once we've got the action and the neck relief, then it's a matter of fine-tuning the action, and once we've got the action set the way we want it, it's a matter of intonating the guitar. That's the sort of final step really. So here we have the tuner is now just waiting to have the screws put in place, and then we go back over the other side and tighten them up with the adjustable spanner. I'm just going to give these a little clean here before we tighten them down. So, where is my screwdriver head? That will do. So that one, I'll keep that one. Right, so little tiny screws. Luckily they're magnetic. Those don't belong. Those are not. They are for the truss rod cover. It can be very difficult to spot them. So I'm just doing these by hand, mainly because they're very, very small and we don't want to strip out the thread. And you can feel much easier by doing it manually. It's only a little tiny bit slower. Okay, fiddly stuff, slow stuff. Once you've got the screws in on this side, then that holds the whole unit in place, and you can go around and do the tightening up with the nut on the other side with an adjustable spanner. Three out of 6 done. Look, to be doing this with the door wide open, how cool. It's not boiling exactly, but being extravagant because I've got the heater on as well as the door open. So I'm just heating the world at the moment. But hey. So just a standard number of things now to do, and absolutely wouldn't expect any complications from here. This should be a fairly straightforward process of setting the action. As I said, there's a sort of the Tune-o-matic bridge is a slightly primitive thing, so it has a kind of compromise all round really. Whoops, jeez. You can only, the Tune-o-matic bridge, you can only go up and down one side or the other, or both sides. You can't do individual things. The individual bridge saddles don't move. They go backwards and forwards for the intonation, but not up and down for the action. So it's kind of all or nothing. So I'm now just tightening up these nuts here with the adjustable spanner. Bit fiddly, but it works. I think, Graham, you had your eye on this one. Let's hope it comes out and plays like it should when we get there. We'll know shortly. Okay, tuner's on nicely. Let's get the posts in. Stop posts at the back, and I'll go down to the ground on each both the bridge post and the tuner and the tail posts, and obviously I'm going to adjust them away from the lowest place, and I'm going to bring them outwards to set the playing action. Now, to be honest, everything about this nut is probably fine. I don't really want to do anything other than stick it back in, so I'm just going to literally do that now. Even though it's got a slightly ragged base, it's only ragged because of where a bit of hard glue came off, so if I just glue back there, it'll find its natural level and go back in. Just line it up so it's as tidy as it can be. downward pressure on it and stand clear. Okay, just make sure it's, yeah, that's as nice as it will go. Okay, so what did I say? Pens on this. Get a set of ball regular slinkies. Not quite sure why I said 10s, but I just think it would be a. Just feels like it needs them. Don't ask me why. Righty ho. So let's get the bridge out. Now, this is an interesting one. I don't want to get into a big argument, but there are people who say that the screws on this tunotic bridge should always face the front, and there are people who, like me, prefer them facing the back. And the only argument I've heard from anyone who says they should be facing the front, and the argument says it's because they say, because if they face the back, it can be that the string can come out of there and touch the screw at the back, and it might make a rattle or something. I've never seen it do that ever, so it's not a very strong reason why not. If it faces the back, you can get easier access to set the intonation, in my opinion. However, I'm going to face the front because that's the standard thing, and I'm selling this to someone else. But I want you to know that I'm deeply unhappy about it. Have you got that? Now, I want a pair of pliers. I don't want my fret pullers, I want a pair of pliers. No, don't want the big choppers, man. I just want a reasonably... I took them away with me, didn't I? No, I didn't. Right. Okay. I'm going to get annoyed. For the moment, I'm going to have to use the big cutters, which I don't like because it means my other ones are missing. Maybe I took them away. Maybe I didn't. I don't know. No, maybe they're here. Maybe they're here. Okay, panic over. Rubbish. I forget I said any of that. So here we go. I'm going to attach first string onto the tailpiece, pull the tailpiece on, and come down this business end. Now with the stringing, I'm going to do the 1 over and 2 under method that I learned from somebody online. I won't tell the story of Gavin anymore because it's a bit long-winded. So I'm going all the way on, under slightly tight, and I'm going to pull back the distance of about 1 1/4 fret, and then I'm going to start winding whilst holding the string. And what I want is for the held string to go over the top of the loose string on my first turn round, and then as it comes round I'm going to bend the loose string up, and then I'm going to use my finger to direct the held string under the loose string, so we've had 1 over and as many under as we now need just to bring it under tension. Now while the glue on the nut is as yet not fully set possibly, I'm just going to cut this off right there, and I'm going to leave it fairly loose because I don't want it to pop the thingy. I don't want to pop the nut off by putting it under a huge load. Once I've got all the strings on, then I'll put them under load. Sorry, you're looking at the wrong place. I'm hopeless with the camera work today. Okay, here comes the A string. Again, straight the way through. I'm resting this now, which I don't often like to do when I'm doing anything with frets because it bends the neck. But now I'm just stringing it. I'm resting this whole thing on the ground. You can see the angle is quite extreme, which is why Les Pauls and things like this break their necks easily. This one, of course, hasn't, but it's not that hard to do. All it has to do is fall on this, flat on its back like this, and that's that, finished. It'll snap off. So round, pull up, direct under. So 1 over and then 2 or however many under. And again, fairly loosely in the slot. Snip the excess. And move on. So a nice quick restringing process. Hello Yummy. so little room to make those adjustments on the bridge piece there, but hellfire. I'm following it by the book. Okay, through, back a fret and a quarter or fret and a half ish. Make sure I'm doing the right one. Over the top, down it goes, lift it up, push it under. This guy also showed, once you've got this all strung up, a way of manually stretching all these strings twice over before you start playing, which will take almost all of the stretch out of it, which means you could pretty much get somebody to restring your guitar off stage and hand it back to you, and you should be able to play it without any major worries of it going out of tune. That's if you've got a fairly stable tuners on it anyway. Some guitars just won't stay in tune no matter what you do to them. The AcePro SG that I've got is not one of those. It stays in tune very well. That's one of the first things I noticed about it and really liked. They just look like vintage tulip kind of green tuners, the kind of stuff you'd find on a vintage style or vintage Gibson. But they're obviously AcePro's own brand, but they really are good. So I'm hoping the same applies to these things on this. Don't see any reason why not. Okay, two more, and then we can load it up a little bit. And as we load the pressure on the strings, what's going to happen is it's going to pull the neck, going to bend the neck as it's bound to do, because I can't remember how much, a couple of £100 of pressure. So it's obviously going to pull the neck and want to bend the neck into a curve, and it will do, and that's what the truss rod is there to do, to allow us to just control the amount of that bend and temper it, if you like. But we have to have some relief or bend in the neck when it comes to playing, because it's what allows the string at the centre of its kind of rotation. It allows it to move in quite a large motion, which, if you want to imagine what I mean, just think of a skipping rope. Two people, one person at either end, and they're swinging it round and round, and somebody's jumping over the middle of it. So that's like a string vibrating in the middle. It's making the biggest arc through space, and your guitar strings need that, a degree of that, or some space to move like that. And that's why we have neck relief, or some space, otherwise known as some space for the strings, to kind of describe that circular motion or rotation even. So if you hear somebody talking about flattening the neck and say, oh, I've taken all of the curve out of it, it's not really what you want, because what will happen is you'll hit the strings and notice that very quickly you get buzzing as the strings, the biggest part of their motion will hit the fretboard very quickly. Okay, everything is on. Just cut short now. Everything's lovely and clean. We have, let's put this over here. Hello again. Chuck all these away. So, what do we need to do? Well, the first thing we need to do is set an absolutely basic action on this. For that I will use a screwdriver, which I can't see at the moment, so I'll just pull one of these. I'm going to adjust the Tune-o-matic bridge, and of course at the moment there's not enough load on the strings, first of all, but they're also completely flat down on the ground. So I'm going to counterclockwise to raise this up on this side, on the bass side. I'm just going to give myself a playing action, and I'll do the same on this side to basically duplicate the gap. Now this is only for starters, starter for 10. What I'm going to do while I'm at it, since I might as well, I'll follow the Gavin advice. So once you've got your strings on, and I'll take a note off the tuner, I just want to put it broadly under in tune, so I'll tune it up first. So what we know is, straight away we've got some force now on the thing. But what I want to do is just go along the strings and press, kind of thumb against fingers. So I'm doing this, just to take the natural stretch out of these strings. I'm just conscious I'm not going to bend it too hard so I don't force it to too tight an angle over the nut or the over the bridge down this end. But I just want to take as much of the natural stretch out of each string as possible. So I shift over to the other strings and then go up to one end as far as I can go without getting my fingers stuck, and then come back down. And I found that you probably only have to do this maybe twice to get all of the major stretch out of the strings. It's a bit of a pain, but you know, you just kind of stick with it. Worth doing if you don't want to spend the first few hours just constantly retuning. Two more. Now normally I would have sort of yanked it upwards, but Gavin insists that's not a good one to do. Not sure, I'd probably do still give it a pull up there when once I've finally got it almost stable, then I give it a couple of pulls in that direction. I tend to, and that tends to take the very last bit out of it. Now this will be way out of tune all of a sudden, as you'd expect. Already feels really nice compared to what it did before, and that's just without really paying too much attention to it. So I'm very pleased. There is some to take out of here that will improve it as well. So there's a way to go yet, but it already feels much better than it did when I got it. Also, had a lot of pinging on the nut previously on the tuners, so that's gone. So I don't know quite why that's gone, but it's solved that. We will cut the nut slots a little bit to get this action right down to what it should be, because it's too high, and that will make the thing feel even easier to play. And to do that I will use my nut files out of sequence, because at the moment they are a set designed for the super slinkies, which is the 9s, and this is the 10s. So I will basically use the E string one twice and something else as well. Then I will use it out of sequence after that, and end up not using the thinnest one. So it'll just be basically out of sequence, and I'll improvise for what I need to do on the E string. So again, this will be the last bit of detuning, I think, and it won't be as much. incredibly low action at the moment, so that probably needs to change, although I quite like it. But it's still a bit, yeah, it's too low. So before we go any further, I'm going to crank that up. I could do it with a measurement. This is probably under 1 millimetre, or just around 1 millimetre, which is, yeah, no, it's just over 1 millimetre. It's too low. So I'm going to add some to it, which will obviously make it go sharp. Come on, man, you can do it. Alright, that's better. I'll just go back down a bit. That's 2. I'm going to go to 2 as my sort of benchmark and come down from 2. 2 on the bass side and just under 2 on the treble side. And I'll retune it because that's going to make it go quite a bit sharp. Okay, ooh, not used to the big tail end. Righty, so we have the thing under load, pretty much tuned. The last tuning adjustments we'll make as it plays in. What I want to know now is what's happening with the shape of the neck. God, I cracked myself in the face with that thing. There's a little bit of relief in there and a little bit of relief in there. And I can see a bit of a stiffness in this part of the neck here, but as I said, way back earlier on, there's nothing we can do about that. Question is overall, have we got as much as we need? And you can kind of, if you're that kind of person, you can go for a measurement. I haven't got my, I have one. I was going to say I haven't got my capo in here, but I have a capo. You can capo the first fret and then press your finger on the last fret and observe the distance between them, and that's very, very little. So it could probably do with a tiny bit of a turn in favour of, ooh, bloody hell, relaxing. You need quite a lot of space to be wielding this guitar. You can put a little bit of a counterclockwise turn to just slacken off the truss rod, just relax its hold. And I don't think I adjusted this one previously, so, or was it, did I? Or was it the telly? I can't remember now. Get in there. Okay. Getting these things to actually fit in is so difficult. Right, tiny bit of tweak to add a little bit of relief in. Yeah. Let's have a look. stretch. That's not bad, everything's playing. So what we now want to do is take a close-up look at the nut slots, and to do that I'm going to shine a big bright light down here, which will give me some shadows I can work with. Okay, so I'm happy with that action. It's quite a good compromise action. It's not mega fine, and it's not mega heavy. It's right playable. And I just want now to find, I'm now looking for, ow, okay, this now is going to start annoying me. What I would like now, please, is to be shown the whereabouts of my feeler gauges. And I'm feeling fates are not going to be playing fair with me on this one, because I can't see where it is. So the question is, did I take them with me in the emergency kit? I don't think I did, because it wouldn't fit in there. Okay, I'm going to have to stop and go into a stupid searching mode for the feeler gauges, without which I'm not really going to, well, I could, but I'm not going to kick off trying to do the playing action. Right, I'm going to stop, I'm going to take a break, I'm going to find these damn things, and then I'm going to come back. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Reloved Guitars workshop. What a beautiful spring day it is. They're sorting her driftwood collection, and on such a beautiful day I'm in here finishing off the AcePro Explorer, which having played it a little bit yesterday is turning out to be a really nice guitar. Needs work doing on the nut action particularly, and then the intonation. It'll be done, and the same applies to this lovely, I don't know what you call this colour, butterscotchy sand coloured Telecaster, Squire Telecaster of the standard series. Anyway, I'm keen to get cracking, and we're going to take care of the action, the nut action and the intonation on, I guess we'll go with the Explorer first. I just need to get going, because we've got two of those guitars to finish off today, and possibly might even fit in the double cut Cruiser Crafter double cut as well, because that should be a fairly simple one to do. So I'm going to go back to the boring sort of shot at the moment and drop it over. Fairly dreary view, but hopefully it's not quite as burned out as it was yesterday. Just had a quick look at some video from yesterday, and there was a real hot spot and the camera was struggling to cope with it, but that's the way it goes. Before I put the guitar on the bench, I'm just going to shake out this mat. Just get rid of some of the dust. I don't feel like I've had so much room in this shed for ages. It's a real luxury. I've got loads of industrial cardboard in the car that I have to go and liberate shortly and put it up in the spare room, but it's not going to go back in here, which is great. So it means this nice bit of spring cleaning has given me back tons of room, which I'm really pleased about. Okay, so the job here today is to set the playing action, particularly the nut action, on both this AcePro Explorer and the Squire Strat. So it's kind of the same process twice. And to do that, I'm going to use a set of nut files and some other tools which are welding nozzle cleaning things. I've got a few different ones, but I tend to use the files mostly, but these things, little other things, come in handy when I have to do a heavier gauge of strings, because the nut files I've got range, or are basically are built for a super slinky range, and at the moment I've got 10s which aren't super slinkies, so I've got 10s on both these guitars that I'm going to be doing. So what it means is that the 9 is too small, and so I'm going to use the whole lot out of sequence, which means that I'm going to use the 42, the thickest one, twice, but with the assistance of a slightly thicker thing over here. Anyway, that's just my way around the problem. So what are we doing? The thing to point out, if you haven't watched any of these videos before, and please ignore if you have, one of the things people, when they get a guitar, they often think that the playing action down at this end, they often think that's the thing that really makes the guitar play, or easy or hard to play, and so people are always tweaking the action down here. And obviously it does, you know, the height over the 12th fret, when you see a guitar where it's really high, it's really hard to squeeze that down and play bar chords up here. But actually, perhaps the less known problem is the action down here at the nut. And actually this, in my experience, makes the guitar even harder to play than an extra 5mm up here. That's sort of bearable. But it's down here that if this is high over the 1st fret, it's really difficult to play. Not only that, if it's high over the 1st fret, as I've explained before many times, it also makes the notes you play down here tend to go sharp, because you have to squeeze the string so hard to fret it that it actually ends up sharpening the note. So when you've tuned to a perfect E, I'm not saying that is, but let's say we tune that to a perfect E, then fretting this goes sharp of F, because I can see already, don't know if you can see, but there's quite a big gap there, and you can see how much bend is on that string to get it to fret, so that coming off the nut it's way high over the 1st fret, and I have to really push in to get that to fret, and you can see that the bend is quite extreme. It's probably out of focus, I'm sorry about that. Anyway, the point being is a year of experimenting with this has shown me that what you really need to make it play really smoothly is an action of about action over the 1st fret on electric guitars, all things being equal, which they never are, but you need an action of around about 0.3 of a millimetre. And with this one, if I use my feeler gauge, I would guess it's about 0.6 or 0.7, and I'll just use my metric things and get a combination of 0.5 and 0.2. Just a guess, it could be a bit more or less, but so it's more. So it's around about 0.8, even 0.85. Let's have a look. 0.8. So straight away I can tell you that this, if the optimum is 0.25-ish, this is nearly 1 actually, this is 0.9 or 1. So we've got nearly a centimetre, nearly a millimetre of action over this fret when the guitar is upright. Just one quick note is when I put it down like this and the neck is tilting downwards under gravity, it will flatten it out somewhat, so we won't get an absolutely accurate reading when we're laying it down. We can work on it this way, but all I know is when I'm working on it this way and I settle for 0.25 or 3 here, I know that when I pick the guitar up and take the gravity off the neck, it's going to be a little larger than that. But my 0.25 or 3 is a very comfortable conservative estimate, so I don't mind if it goes to 0.35 when I stand it up, or if I cut it to 0.25, I don't mind if it goes to a 0.3 when I stand it up into the playing position. So currently this guitar at the moment is sounding brilliant. It's got fabulous natural sustain to it. It's going through the oak table as well, which is sort of making it sound even better than it is. But if I lift it off, it's still got a load of sustain. So I'm really happy, but I just want to improve this playing action down here, and then that and the action I've got already dialed in here I think will make a fabulous guitar. So this distance between, the difference between the 0.25 I'm looking for, hello Morris, the 0.25 I'm looking for and the 1 millimetre that we've got here, when you look at it on a ruler, it's a tiny difference. You know, we're talking very, very small amounts of space. But if you think about it as multiples of the ideal, so if the ideal is 0.25, 1 millimetre is 4 times greater than it should be. And that 4 times is what's going to make it go sharp and play, really make your notes go sharp. And actually the thing I haven't mentioned is, sorry Morris, just move a sec. What does this manifest as? How do you know? Well, if it's too high, the first thing is it's quite hard to play bar chords, so you need quite a strong grip, which is okay for experienced players, but if you're a new player, you'd experience that as, I can't get an F to sound cleanly. So that's the first disadvantage, yes, of having this high action, is that it's hard to play. But the other thing is that when you've tuned the guitar up perfectly, what you'll find is that suddenly bar chords like a D, bar chords, open chords like a D, thanks for deadening it Morris, will sound slightly out of tune. Now, to a newcomer, you won't notice that. To somebody who's been playing a few years, it'll just be, it's just a bit out of tune, and then you start tuning a little bit more and thinking you're out of tune, you go bing bong and set it all up again, and then you play the D, and you go, oh, it's just a bit grungy. I wouldn't happily play that on stage, it sounds horrible. And that tiny disharmonic, or whatever you call it, that tiny out of tuney feel is the result of this high playing action on the first fret. Then you go, Morris. And it's interesting that in my experience that's almost never taken care of in the factory or anywhere else for that matter, factory or shop. And I'm just going to show you something using my whiteboard, which is cool because I've got the whiteboard, I can do it. Using the whiteboard, these sort of received wisdom of how these things go. I remember seeing, there was a period of time when you sort of see things in the press or the media, the guitaring media or whatever it is. It's only 5 strings, damn it. Okay, and what you see is that the received wisdom is, there's your slots cut into the top of your nut. And if you, I can't remember in the sort of 90s, thousands, I remember reading, it was all the thing that the idea was that what you had to aim for was that your strings should sit half in and half out, well not, you know, just above the surface. That was what you aimed for, this kind of string sitting out, because the idea of that was that the logic was that a string that sat like that, obviously fitted better than that drawing, but a string that sat like that had all of this side free, it wasn't touching the slot, and only this side here, or this underside, was touching the slot, and therefore the minimum drag and chance of sticking. So everybody aimed for that, it seemed to me as a customer. So, you know, you'd buy a guitar and the whole thing, you'd notice every quality guitar announced its qualityness, thank you, with a carefully cut nut with the strings sitting out, and everybody would judge it by saying, oh look how good that is, you know, the strings are in the right, strings are sitting in the right way over the nut. And what wasn't paid any attention to was actually how high was that space, right? It didn't matter, it seemed, as long as you got the thing sitting right and looking right. And this distance here between the string and the first fret, let's call that the first fret, didn't seem to matter. And so in a sense this became the priority. And if you went into guitar forums and you asked about, or listened to the way people talked about nuts and strings and whatever, and the first fret action, mostly you never really heard anything about this distance here. You just heard about, you're an idiot if you'd cut the slots too deep and your strings, if your strings sat in a slot that looked like this, you know, you could expect humiliation, you know, if that's where your strings were, down there. Now, interestingly, it didn't matter if you got this right, you were just considered to be an idiot because your string was buried in the nut. So it was just a matter of priority, and that's all I could learn back then when I was looking into this way before I started doing this guitar stuff, is that it just seemed that that was the priority that the manufacturers went to, and actually if you went in the forums it seemed that was it received wisdom that you aimed for, and if your guitar didn't look like that, or your nut didn't look like that, you were a cretin. So interestingly, with that as a priority, what I never saw taken care of, and still don't in guitars to this date, is it doesn't seem like any attention was really paid to the more important thing, which is the height of the string over the first fret. And Mr. Morris, you need to move because I need the space. So what I learned over a couple of years, was that that distance between the difference between 0.25 of a millimetre on this first fret and 1 millimetre, which we've got here, is so great that it spoils the entire experience of playing this guitar. Not immediately, pick it up and think, wonderful, great, but after a little time you take it home and you tune it up and you go, this is usually the G actually, you go, that's a bit sharp, and you tune it, you get it exactly right according to the tuner, and then you go, still sounds wrong, and it's because of the amount of force required to press it down. Alright, I've made that point endlessly, sorry. I do like to go on. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, knowing what I know, I'm going to use my files and my feeler gauge on metric, and I'm going to pick a 0.3 to start with, and I'm going to aim for a 0.3. Now I'll know it's a 0.3 when this thing stops ringing cleanly and it starts to catch. So that's the sort of guide, and I'm doing it not in the knowledge that the neck is bending back. I'm not going to prop it up at this stage, I'm just going to let it hang where it hangs, and I'll go for a 0.3 knowing that it'll be more than 0.3 when I tip it over. So what do? First thing I do is I take off these first strings. Do I take off the first strings? Yeah, I'm going to work from the D outwards. Okay, so I'm taking off the A and the E. Now what's true is that the tension on the neck has reduced, and that will affect it slightly, but experience again has shown me that if I work with this, it's not a problem. So I know that in my set the string gauge size I'm looking for on this one is this one. It's 0.32 roughly. So again, I can put the gauge directly underneath, I can see the gap. Often it's quite good to get some light bouncing off it to see the shadow, which I can work for. I can see it, you won't see it there, but I can see it from this angle, and that can help me see the gap, and it can also help me gauge them all so that they're all the same. And in fact, as long as I get one right, I can visually set the rest of them, believe it or not, because the eye is very sensitive and accurate in being able to gauge those things. So here we go. We know we've got to take some out of this nut, and I'm now starting to cut, tilting backwards, and I cut a little bit, and I'm going to slack this a little bit more, cut a bit, bring string back, and just check, look for the shadow, look for the gap. Does it ring? Yep, we've got more to cut. And so I'm just going to cut away at this angle, and the leaning back angle is because I want the string to come up and launch cleanly off the front edge of the nut. Front edge being the edge pointing towards the bridge. I need the string to be relatively tensioned because I want it to drop to the bottom of this slot each time I put it back in to check how far I've got. But I don't want it to be so tensioned that it kind of breaks or I end up damaging it while I move it side to side. So the height is going down bit by bit, and you can see I'm not rushing, I'm just doing a bit of a cut, blow the dust away and go back and check. And here I can still see fresh air under that. Now if you were doing this and you start to think, my god, these tolerances are tiny, you know, surely 0.3 of a millimetre is too small a gap. Surely we need more than that for the strings to resonate, sustain, you know, whatever it does, you know, oscillate cleanly. Well, actually, you'd be amazed, right? If you were to get a capo, next time, get a feeler gauge and a capo and go to your favourite guitar and stick the capo on the first fret, like this. Get your feeler gauge, and I want you to check what's the actual clearance under this new first fret. That was the old first fret, of course. This is now a 0 fret when you've got the capo on. And check for the clearance. Now you know full well that your guitar plays brilliantly, and you'll find that that gap is about 0.1 of a millimetre. So your guitar is designed to play with a gap over the first fret of 0.1 whenever you're using a capo. So the point here is that if you can play cleanly using a capo, the 0.3 we're aiming for is actually quite generous. Okay, so it's not scientific, but it's just a little thing to kind of reassure you that your guitar plays brilliantly well when you put it on a capo, and actually the space under that first string, between the string and the first fret when you've got the capo on, is about 1/10 of a millimetre, no more. So when your little voice inside you is saying this is too low, remember you could go even lower and it would only be as easy to play as it is when you've got the capo on, which is usually quite easy to play. And in there is the secret of how I discovered how to do this, because I had a guitar that just wouldn't work because of this problem, and I hadn't solved why it was. And all I noticed, or the clue I had, was that every time I capoed it, it turned it into the guitar I wanted it to be. So eventually I realised that there was something I could learn from the tolerances or the distances that I had when the capo was on, and I started to do some measurements and work it out. So we're nearly there with this one, and you can see that I've taken quite some time to do this. Slower, carefuler, and I'm aiming to just see the gap disappear and hear that string just begin to catch on the first fret. Sorry, on the feeler gauge. Now, and that's about it. So those of you watching with eagle eyes will know that, my God, look, this string is deep inside the nut now. That's disgusting. What a useless luthier. What a hopeless human being. You should stop making these videos. Sorry if I sound bitter. It's only momentary. But yeah, now according to that sort of great wisdom of the 90s and thousands, that is a shoddy, disgraceful nut, you know, prone to sticking and binding. Well, think about it, okay? Is it going to bind? No, because you've got a slot that's cut the same width, in fact slightly larger because you move like that. So actually the slot is always slightly larger all the way down than the string. So where's it going to hug it? And it isn't going to bind because I will put graphite powder in there. And if you really wanted to, you could, once you've done this, is push all the strings off to the side, and you could reshape this nut so that the strings once again sat on top, but what you know is that that clearance is now the exact correct clearance that you need. So it's possible to do it that way. I don't, particularly because I've worked out to my own satisfaction that it's immaterial, this idea. It might be important if you were cutting these slots with some strange tool that wasn't matched to the string gauge, but we're not. We're pretty close to it, so I don't need to go to that extent. But you can do. You know, if you do this yourself, you're entirely free to get your diamond files out afterwards and reshape this nut so that it's much lower and the strings sit proud of the slot, because you will still retain the correct, the crucial and correct distance now that we've established between the string and the first fret. So I'm just going to tune this back up. Roughly. And I'm doing that because I just want to put some more tension back on. Now I can see straight away that that gap is really, really small now, and I can see that these other gaps are significantly larger. So I'm going to, when it comes to it, I'm going to work those to the same sort of gap, and having a light giving me this extra shadow really helps me to see that, or helps me to judge when those things are approaching the same sort of same size of slot. But I won't go for it. I will check it with the feeler gauge, which is set on 0.3 still. Okay, so having done that one, I'm now going to move down to the A string, and again I know it's too high already, so I'm just going to start recutting the slot. This is slightly larger than the gauge I'm using, so I am over cutting these holes just slightly, sorry, the slots. But again, same old, run it, check it, cut some more. Now when it comes to the last one, I'm going to need to do some cutting with both this nut file and with the slightly oversized welding nozzle cleaning files. So again, not worried about the tuning, I'm just worried about having enough tension so it sits right down in the slot, so I can make a correct assessment of the height above the first fret, and then off I go, cutting, and I'm cutting out that angle again. It's not really critical that the angle on each slot is exactly the same as the angle on the previous one. It just needs to be enough of an angle that the string isn't coming flat over the top. If you cut it the wrong way, what would happen is that your intonation point would become the back of the nut as opposed to the front, and that, because that's about 3mm, that's a substantial intonation problem which you wouldn't be able to cure other than replacing the nut. So it just needs to be a bit of a slant, but it doesn't need to be the exact same slant on every string. So you don't need a special angle protractor or whatever. You just need to know, and the way I know it is I put it in the slot and then I just tilt it a little bit, and that tilt doesn't have to be huge, it just needs to be enough that I know it's tilting. Okay, I can see from the shadow we're starting to approach roughly the same sort of height. Again, this string will be quite far inside the nut now because of this. But as I say, there's no way on earth that the look of the nut should be the priority above the function of it. I mean, that's just a mad point of view, really. And I think when you play a guitar where this has been done right, you'll know the difference straight away. It just feels like it's easier to tune, first of all, because that's how this improvement is experienced. It's technically not the case, but you won't spend loads of time keep trying to retune it to make that open chord sound right. So your experience of this will be that it's easier to tune, and your experience of it will be that it's effortless to fret chords at this end, including bar chords. So if you're a newcomer to the guitar, then this will make it so much easier. So I'm going just by reflections at the moment, but I'll just do another check. I can make the note ring so there's still space, and I can press down and see the movement so there's still space. And like I said, this I'm aiming for 3. 0.3, sorry. I'm aiming for 0.3, and 0.3 is still 0.2 above 0.1, which we know from our capo experiment is the absolute minimum this guitar can, or most electric guitars will play with. Beyond that, you're hitting the first fret, basically, obviously. But at 0.3, you can see that it's quite conservative. We're cautious. We've got quite a bit of room, and they don't have to be exact. I mean, you know, if one of these has gone from 1mm down to 0.4 and all the rest of 0.3, you've still got a guitar that's better, easier to play and better intonated than before. So, but we will get as close to being accurate as we can humanly get. So we're getting very close with this one. I'm going to put a little bit more tension on it, make sure it sits properly. Still ringing free, so I have a very slight amount more to take. And I think I'm going to call that quits. Yep, and I'm going to put some graphite powder into that slot and drop the string back in and tune it. There you go. Just be aware that when you do work with a feeler gauge, believe it or not, the feeler gauge can scratch the fret. It's not major deal scratching it, but it does a little tiny bit. So when you play it, or when you use it, you just need to be careful you don't scrape on the fret. It's quite a tricky one. Okay, so this string here, I'm going to start by using the same gauge as cutter and the nut file as I was using before, and it won't be quite the right size, so I'm going to slightly overcut it with the welding nozzle doofer, which is the right size for this, and I have to get the right one, and it just helps me ease this off, and it makes it so that I won't run the risk of any binding. These are quite difficult to manipulate, so I'm going to use two and widen it out a little bit. There's the first one, and then the second one is a fraction wider. Yeah, it's just a way of avoiding getting that binding that we don't want. We don't want to fall victim of that, because the critics will then be right, potentially right. Okay, so that's a nice fit. Again, back to the note, loads of room underneath. Off we go, continue the cut. Slightly slanted downwards. You can either use, if you don't have the pipe cleaner things, you can enlarge the slot by wiggling the thing side by side, side to side, and it will work. One thing I've learned over time is don't assume that the rate at which these files cut, that each slot is anywhere near the same. What might take you 5 minutes on the D string slot you might suddenly be overcut on another slot. It's just the way that the different thicknesses cut is different. It's worth just being aware of that so you don't get caught out. Because the only downside of this procedure is if you cut too far, you're looking at a new nut, or at a temporary measure, a super glue and baking powder fix, which is workable but not brilliant. And actually, it doesn't even have to be baking powder. It could be bone dust, which you can sand from you can have a bone nut especially for the purpose. Quite useful to do. Get some sandpaper and just file the hell out of it and get a pile of dust, drop it into the overcut slot, and then just drip in some very runny super glue into that into the slot, and that will immediately set to give you a kind of paste or resin made from bone dust, which is in a way as hard when it's done as the original nut itself. Doesn't look so good on a black nut, obviously. You tend to kind of get away with it much better on a white or cream nut. But that's your sort of, that's your get out of jail free card, I guess you could call it. Still quite a bit of room. it's spring, so everybody's getting their strimmers out. So forgive the garden sort of noises. I found the only danger of doing the bass strings first is that it can be, you get used to really working quite hard on these slots, and then the danger is that you take that same sort of force and approach to the thinner strings, and I found that the files go through a lot quicker the thinner they are. Okay, we're close. Just a tiny whiff more on this and then I'll stop. Or will I? No, still more. Sometimes I get tempted to stop too quick, but I have to sit it or take it to the very end. Still running cleanly, or sounding cleanly, which means there's space, still more space to take out. So look how long it's taken just to do 3 of these strings. Nearly there. I've been very careful to try and reduce the stress on the strings themselves, so when it comes to lifting them to one side or another, be really careful to sort of get round underneath them and gently move them over so they don't get twanged. Again, still some more to go. Tempted to stop early, but I'm not going to.
That stupid chest pain again.
You heard it here. Need to take a break.
Sure, it's coming from my neck.
Still more. Keep on going. Right. Put some sticks back in. Yeah. Okay. So that's the E string done, and again I'm going to drop a bit of whatever that stuff is, which I end up throwing all over the work surface all the time because I always forget where I put the little pot. And again, I'm going to tune this. No, Morris. Come on, friend. It's not a good time right now. So that's the first 3 done, and they are really nice and low now, completely different. To complete this, now I'm going to slack off the first one, the E, and I'm going to slack it quite a long way off to drop it off the side without putting it under any stress. And same with the B, and I'm going to work onwards now from the G string. And on my sequence it's slightly out of sequence, but I can go now with this one, the 20.024. And again, just get myself ready to check to begin with. See the size of the gap. I'm going to slack it off a little bit just so I can move it to the side without stressing it too much. And here we go. Now I've got, as I say, I've got 10s on this guitar, so it feels good with the 10s on it. It really doesn't feel, they don't feel tight at all. I feel very springy. Morris, my dear Morris, I'm so sorry. You go down there.
Still more interested in what you're doing.
I know. He's a boy, isn't he? Again, so the watchword here is don't assume that it's going to cut at the same rate as the bottom E that we just finished. This is a whole different kettle of cutting. Again, checking each time, get the right fret. I mean, the feeler gauge is the most accurate indicator, obviously. If you do this lots, you can develop the sort of eye for where things are. You can trust in the eye, and actually you could do it all visually after you've done the first one. So you don't need kind of loads of high-tech things. You can trust your eye and the size of the shadow and make sure they're all the same. It's quite easy to do, but it's good to have something as a start point. If it's a feeler gauge, then great. If it's something you just work to every time, the thickness of a credit card or whatever, I don't know, whatever works, gives you the action you want. Okay, still some more to go on this. Get a bit more tension. Nearly there, not far off. So you can see it's a very slow and concentrate-y type of process. If you take your eye off it, it's very nearly there. If I'm very nearly there and I just want to double check, I'm going to check the visual gap. I'm going to stop at that. Quite comfortable. Put a bit of graphite powder under there, drop it back in, and again I'm going to tune it. Again, it doesn't have to be exact, it just needs to be under load really. And then I'm going to move to the 16 or 0.016, but again before I cut I'm going to drop that string back in, load it a bit and check it. Look at the shadow, look at the distance. It's not much, it's not as much as you'd think. So this one is like proceed with caution. It's here that, believe it or not, in my experience, you're almost always going to overdo it, if you're going to overdo it. So it's a real, just decrease the pressure, decrease the force you're working with, check more often. And trust the thingy. Feeler gauge. It's all going good so far. Now once we've got this sorted, then we can just do a final tweak to the action if needs be, and we'll be ready to go with this guitar. Ready to photograph, in fact, and need a bit of a polish, but outside it's such a lovely sunny day. We get a nice selection of shots. Although I think Graham has an eye on this one, so I'm going to give him first refusals on it. So it may well, we don't need to put these pictures on the listing on eBay. But it's always good to have a kind of record anyway, and in case we do need to list it. Still more. So in my experience of doing this, apart from occasionally just overcutting it, I've never had anything worse happen to it. At this stage I've never had, for example, it's never snapped a nut or cut through or anything like that. It's only the worry is overcutting the slot and ending up having to fill it or replace the nut. So it's almost there, very close. So it's a very inexpensive way of hugely improving your guitar with quite... That's good, I'm going to stop there. That's with quite a small amount of risk involved, providing you, at worst, you stand by with a new nut in your toolbox, and at best, or if you have to, get out of jail free with a bit of super glue and baking powder. Okay, so now down to the last one, and again, it's like they say that the majority of car accidents happen within sort of 100 yards of home, or quarter of a mile of home, and it's a bit like that with this. We're on the last string, and this is where we really don't want to screw up the whole job. So this is caution at all times. Slower than anything. There's so much at stake now because it's all gone so well. We don't want to screw it up. Interestingly, these nut files, they're not cheap. They're about 60 quid or something, or 45, 50, 60 quid a set. But you can, like me, use a combination of the cheaper sort of makeshift things plus these nut files to cater for most, or the two most commonly used gauges, the 10s and the 9s, without having to buy multiple sets. But the way I kind of rationalise this is, I would recommend, even if you aren't setting up to work on other people's guitars, I would really suggest thinking about the value of these things, because I said it a few times on different videos, so again, apologies if it's boring, but when you first either play a guitar like this that's been done properly, or you do it to your own guitar, so you really know what it was like before and now what it's like once you've done it, you'll suddenly see that actually that set of that job, this improvement, is probably worth, how would you put a value on it? 50 quid. It's such a better guitar. It's almost like a completely new thing. It's like you've got a new guitar for the price of, well, how much? 50 quid for the set of things, and maybe a spare nut just to be on the safe side as an insurance policy. But so my feeling would be that the experience of transforming your guitar would be worth the money, even for one set. But then most people have got more than one guitar, so then you kind of start dividing that cost by however many guitars you've got, and you can go ahead and make that improvement to that will give you infinite grin value. So that, what price can you put on that? And then you sort of look at how many guitars you're going to have through the rest of your life, which is probably going to be more than the one or two you've currently got, in which case, if you can make that same improvement to all of those, then it's actually cheap. I'm going to stop there. But of course, you won't know that. It means nothing until you've experienced this the first time, and of course that's why I'm such a ridiculous evangelist when it comes to this. I can't stop talking about how much of an improvement this is, because I've experienced it, and I'm now the converted, and so I will keep on singing the praises of this job. So just, if you're going to take my word on anything, and you're thinking about one tool that you could buy yourself to improve the quality of your guitars without sending them to me or any other person to do the job for you, I would say buy yourself these nut files, because that one task alone will change the guitar. Even if you don't adjust the frets and level them like I do, that one job alone will transform the playing of your guitar. So I'm going to get a tuning from the old faithful amp. Pow! That's what I like. No sharp notes in that open chord. That's what this is all about. Sorry to sound so thrilled by it, but it's why I do it. It's why I do what I do. It's pretty much all I do, actually, if I'm honest, with a few other little improvements, but really is pretty much all I do. One thing this guitar still needs is the intonation set, so I'm going to get the amp up on the bench ready for that. And at the same time just plug it in and show you how beautifully that little adjustment there has improved the intonation, the open chord intonation on this guitar, as well as the thing you can't see but you'd only be able to feel is just how much that's improved the playing, the ease of playing of this too down at this end. Hasn't changed the balance of the guitar, it's still top heavy, but interesting how this guitar has the thing set back to front, so it's logical. That's pointing at the bridge, so it's a bridge. To switches it to the bridge pickup. Oh dear. So make sure all the notes play. We'll still have a bit of slack in it, but we're nearly there on tuning. Well, yep, all going good. So the only thing to worry about now is just the intonation. I'm really happy with that. Now, intonation time, for which we will need the tuner. I'll just point this down so you can see. We should be able to do this fairly quickly. Flathead screwdriver required, as long as possible. Hopefully it won't need too much adjustment, but we never know with the old Tune-o-matic. Could be a right old pain in the backside. I don't mind you seeing what my number is, by the way. You can come and rob my phone and I don't want to do that. You can rob my phone and type in the number. You're welcome to the phone bill. Remind me later to say how great this is. So the idea of the intonation is that each string needs to be slightly tuned to a slightly different playing length, fractionally different, to make it work with the way that the neck, the frets progress up the neck in terms of the decreasing size of the gap between them. So the neck is built for a notional scale length, but in reality each string has to be slightly different, but you can't obviously build a neck that takes that into account. So all the frets on the neck are built to a single formula, and then we make the adjustments on the individual string lengths using the individual saddle adjusters. Some guitars, like the Fender Strat and Telecaster style, also tend to have 6 adjusters, or sometimes 3 pairs of 2, and the simpler bridges, like on some of the old Gibson Gold Top things, and some other guitars, like sometimes the Gibsons and copies of the double cut, unlike that one, but very often have a single stop bar and tailpiece, and it's a wraparound, and they have the intonation preset. It's got a compensated pattern, which you can all you can do then is just move the length, the whole thing backwards and forwards, but you can't individually do it. But on this guitar, here's what we do. We tune to we tune to a harmonic ping on the E, on the 12th fret, and then we fret it. And that note should be pretty much the same, and as far as intonation setting goes, that, according to my ears and my tuner, that's pretty close. Tiny bit flat, if anything, which means that the overall length is too long, which means we would turn this in the clockwise, probably, if I can remember it, clockwise direction, to drag the saddle this way towards the nut, which will change the tuning slightly, or sometimes it will. And I've noticed with the Tune-o-matic bridge, it's very, 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 very unresponsive in my experience. So I'm going to tweak it a bit more. Get the 12th fret, that would help. So what happens is we're making tiny adjustments, and on this Tune-o-matic bridge it never seems to make any difference. So I'm going to do a couple more tweaks. So clockwise is dragging the saddle towards the nut. That's spot on. I'm going to leave that there. So that's that one done. And again, slightly flat. Even that out by pressing really hard. So this is always slightly subjective and also subject to your technique, but it's an average. You do it a few times and you see it's flat each time. Then we've got to do the tightening it up, dragging the saddle forward routine. Now this one is now deciding to get sticky. It's not a really good engineered solution, this bridge, honestly. Retune. To me, that's actually close enough to not fiddle with it, but I'm just going to do it anyway to demonstrate. You can see that with the angle I can get, the only angle I can possibly reach these damn things, it makes a lot of noise, and it also tends to push the screw upwards, which in this case is making it difficult to make the adjustment because the screw wants to just ride up and out. I could try and find a 90-degree screwdriver to get in there, but I'd have to hold it in place as well, which would be really, really difficult. So it's not, going right back to the beginning, I don't know if you remember me saying I much prefer having these adjusted on this side. It's a hell of a lot easier to get to. So I'm going to try again on this one. Of course it makes a hell of a racket anyway. Now I've got to try and do this with two hands. I've got to try and get the, save you the misery. I've got to try and get this to come forward, turn at the same time as pressing it in with the other hand to make sure it turns but doesn't jump out of the slot. And it's actually very stiff and doesn't want to do it. That is not brilliant. And for the amount it's out, I'd be tempted to leave it, but I'm a perfectionist, so I'm going to place this damn creature onto the bench and have a go at making this adjustment. Making this adjustment whilst pressing down. As again, you can see there's absolutely such a brilliant design that there is no way I can make this adjustment without hitting the strings one way or another. And of course what happens is, as you're busy doing this, you're almost invariably going to, because you're coming at an odd angle, which you can see I'm hitting the strings, I'm bending them out of the way, and I'm almost invariably going to scuff the edge of the screw slot on this damn thing, because there is no feasible way I can get to this. Now, having done that, I'm going to just try it one more time. It actually feels like it's worse, believe it or not. Well, it hasn't really made much of an impression on it. So I'm going to try again. Please just turn without riding up out of your slot. Come on, it's riding up again. Press it down again without damaging the strings. These pneumatic bridges have a restraining clip very often, but it's a sort of an attempted solution to an inherent design problem. Determined to make it move now because it's being so obstinate. What I've noticed as well with these pneumatic bridges, it's quite common that as you're making these adjustments you find yourself running out of adjustment room and there's nowhere else you can go, and sometimes it necessitates taking the bridge apart. That's good. Yeah, sometimes it necessitates taking the bridge apart when you've run out of adjustment room. Now I can tell that this one, because I know the pattern of these first two, I can tell the D now has quite a bit of adjustment to make to be right. So again, going underneath the string, it's naturally trying to ride itself out of the slot rather than comply and drag the saddle forward, which it doesn't really want to do. And I'm just about at the limits of how far that saddle will go forward on this D string. So Whether or not I'm going to run out altogether on the other lot, I don't know. Good. Sounds quite good. Spot on. They're all good from there, which is lucky because it's such a pain to have to do. And so, ladies and gentlemen, all together, I'm happy now with the outcome of this thing. I'll just try not to bash it on the roof. That's what I get from playing with a weird shaped thing. Misses. Okay. I'm not going to treat you to any guitar playing, but it's nice. Not my guitar playing. Very easy to play. That's the whole point of this. And it has got a superb low action, just as it happens. I mean, I'm used to spoiling myself completely, but this is a 2mm action at the 22nd fret, which is beautifully low, and an action down here that you barely have to touch. And so this guitar is ready to go. Graham, if you've got your eye on it, you will not regret it. This is beautifully done. The only thing I might just tweak, in fact, is the pickup height. It's biased towards the rear at the moment, and often I guess people like that because they want to be able to switch to kind of a lead, sudden increase in power coming on when you flick it to the lead position. But I'm just going to balance it up a tiny bit more. Obviously I'm not plugged in, so I won't hear that, but it's only about a millimetre difference. Yeah, beautiful. Very happy with the way that's turned out. I'm going to put the cover on now as the final move in this game, and then give it a polish, get it outside on the deck and take some pictures. In case, in the extremely unlikely event that Graham doesn't want to buy this thing, which is highly unlikely if you could only but feel it. Can you feel it? Can you feel it? Can you feel it? Yeah, that's the thing. That's why the video, I suppose, is really important in this, because you have to hear, or you have to kind of be able to make sense of the difference that these adjustments make, or this work makes. And you know, if it was just written down, then there's no reason why it would make any sense to you. Somebody saying, yeah, it's fantastic action, brilliant guitar, blah blah, everyone says that, but it's the ability to, you'll know when you play this, or if you're somebody watching this and planning to do your own adjustments, you will absolutely know the minute you start getting these adjustments right, the hugeness of the difference it makes. And in a way, you'll be like me, you would be just wanting to you want to find opportunities for people to know that difference, because it's just such a great thing. You kind of like want to convince the world. Sorry, my head is annoying. You just want to convince the world to, oh, please go and buy yourself. Don't come to me even. Just go and buy yourself a bunch of nut slots and follow the instructions. It's kind of like a passion. It's not kind of like, it is a passion for getting it right, and for it's just the smile it puts on your face for the scale of the difference it makes. And it's all for want of somebody ever telling you, or me in the first place, you know, a world where it's just left mysterious by maybe luthiers or guitar shops or manufacturers or whatever. And so this is why I do what I do, for this moment here of putting it back together again and what, I've just got to slack this off. You know, for the moment that hopefully Graham or somebody who plays this will be able to feel the difference. There you are, ladies and gentlemen, the guitar is finished. AcePro Explorer style guitar, little known brand, fabulous quality. This is beautifully set up. I am not ashamed to say this is a really well set up guitar now. Fret leveled, frets profiled, frets polished, nut action set perfectly. You could, if you wanted to, if it mattered to you, you could take a file to the nut. You could strip off your strings next time, take a file and file it down so only semicircles were sticking out of those slots, and just lay your strings in them, because the height over the first fret would stay the same. It wouldn't matter, but you could make it look that way if you wanted to. I'm not going to bother, because I am convinced, and I know from experience it doesn't make any difference. And here you have it, a really well put together and well set up guitar from a brand that nobody knows, but it's worth knowing, and I'll be looking out for more, because it's the second really nice playing guitar out of two. So that's it for now, end of this one. I'm off to take some photographs, and I will see you shortly with another guitar.